Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book in today's Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye. Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise, and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns, we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious, and yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Kaye. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you, happy Friday. And it's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be taking your calls throughout the 3 hours of our show. Victoria Jones is going to drop by in about 45 minutes and give us a little insight into what's going on over in the UK. Right now, Elijah Cummings is, his funeral is in process. Both Presidents Clinton and Obama are scheduled to speak there. And we'll see whether it seems like something that we should, bring into the program or not. We're still trying to figure it out. We've covered a lot of territory over the week. I guess the biggest story in the news right now is the one that the New York Times broke yesterday afternoon after we got off the air. And that is that Bill Barr, the man that William Safire used to refer to as Cover-Up General Barr, back when he was Attorney General in 1992, the now deceased William Safire, New York Times columnist, whose column on language I just loved. Absolutely brilliant stuff. A fan of the serial comma, but I devolve into Strunk and White territory at my risk, I realize. But in any case, that Bill Barr is going to, or has shifted what was an administrative inquiry into the, as Donald Trump called it, the oranges of the Russia probe, or Russia investigation, the origins, of course. He's shifted this from an administrative inquiry. In other words, hey, we're going to go back and we're going to talk to some folks and we're going to ask what's going on, but, it's not under oath, it's not with criminal penalties, all that kind of stuff. He has shifted this into an actual criminal inquiry, which means that, well, here's what it looks like. I mean, nobody really knows for sure, but here's what it looks like. It looks like the theory, which is being promoted by Sean Hannity and by others on the far right, and apparently by friends of President Putin, is that it was not Russia who hacked the DNC servers and fed that information to WikiLeaks, so that literally on the day that, and not just the DNC servers, also John Podesta's emails, that literally on the day that Donald Trump gets outed with the Billy Bush Access Hollywood tape, that they can dump a bunch of this stuff in and grab the news cycle. That wasn't the Russians behind that at all. It was actually the Democratic Party operating out of Ukraine at the orders of Barack Obama in order to hurt Trump that did that. Now, you may ask, how is it that the Democratic Party hacking its own server and releasing stuff embarrassing to Hillary Clinton and to the Democratic Party, how does that help Donald Trump? Or excuse me, how does that help Hillary Clinton defeat Donald Trump? Because keep in mind, this is in the mind of Bill Barr and Donald Trump, this is a plot being run out of the Obama White House to help get Hillary Clinton elected. So why would releasing her embarrassing emails, and it turns out there wasn't so much embarrassing there, it was, but that was their hope. Why would it be that releasing her emails would help her rather than Trump? And the theory goes that the American voters are sitting around going, look at that. The Democratic Party is under attack from Donald Trump and the Russians and WikiLeaks. And so, we have to extend our sympathy to Hillary Clinton and the Democrats because they're being so badly beat up by all this information going public. Nobody would want to see their emails go public after all. And so there would be this huge sympathy vote for Hillary Clinton, and thus Hillary Clinton would become president. Now, this is the theory, right? It's been laid out on Fox News by Hannity and others on numerous occasions. It has been bought into apparently by Bill Barr, that this whole thing, that the Democratic Party, operating through some cutouts in Ukraine, hacked the DNC server and hacked John Podesta's email account and stuff like that, hacked that out of Ukraine on behalf of Obama and Clinton, President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton, in order to make Secretary of State Clinton a more sympathetic character so people would vote for her instead of Donald Trump. Now, if that makes no sense to you, welcome to the club. And in fact, last week, the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee released 2 reports that, in summary, said, yeah, it was Russia who ordered the hacking, and it was Russia who was running the influence campaign on Facebook and in other social media that helped get Donald Trump elected. This was a Republican-controlled committee. And every single member of the committee, Democrat and Republican, signed on this thing, signed off on it. It's also what all 18 or 19 intelligence agencies of the United States concluded almost a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, with 100% unanimous consent from the Defense Intelligence Agency to the Central Intelligence Agency to the National Security Agency to the Naval Intelligence Agency to the Army Intelligence Agency to the, just go through the list, right? Every single one of them said, yeah, the hacking of the DNC server and the hacking of John Podesta and the release of this information via WikiLeaks was all coordinated out of Russia. Whether President Putin himself signed off on it or not is something that is still in dispute. Whether it was some rogue Russian oligarchs, we don't know. But there's not any evidence that I've seen so far that this was actually done by the Democrats operating out of Ukraine. But that's what Bill Barr is trying to prove. So now that he has shifted his inquiry, apparently, he's traveled around the world. The Prime Minister of Italy yesterday or the day before came out and said, this is crazy. We got nothing to do with this. Take us out of this loop, please. Barr has made 2 trips to Italy. To the best of my knowledge, there's literally not a single piece of evidence to support this theory that the Democrats hacked themselves. And apparently, as the Department of Justice and John Durham, the federal prosecutor that Bill Barr has enlisted to be his point man on this, although Barr is doing a lot of this himself as well. And it would be interesting to find out if Durham, who up until now has had a pretty good reputation, if he's one of these Opus Dei Catholics who believe in the idea of the noble lie, you know, going back to Plato, like Bill Barr does. I don't know. I'm fascinated by this. But apparently, all the investigation that they did said, no, it wasn't Ukrainians, it wasn't the Democrats, it was the Russians. And so by turning this into a criminal inquiry, what that does is it gives Bill Barr the power, or the Department of Justice the power, when they sit down with somebody, and the people that we know are probably almost certainly in their crosshairs are Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and you know, James Comey. You know, I mean, the former head of the CIA, of the FBI, these former James Clapper. Some of them have been mentioned by name. So now when they sit down with these guys, they're saying, okay, you know, under penalty of perjury, you will tell us what you know or you will go to jail. We can convene a grand jury. And they may have already done this, by the way. And when you go into a grand jury, you can't even have your lawyer with you. And the stakes are really, really high, which is why Bill Barr is refusing to allow the Democrats in their impeachment inquiry to have a grand jury. So they have to hold these private meetings using the House rules that were written back in 2015 in order to investigate Benghazi. The rules under which the House Intelligence Committee is right now doing their impeachment investigation behind closed doors are the exact rules that were put into place by Republicans, signed off on by Paul Ryan, in order to facilitate the Benghazi investigation. So this, I mean, people talk about coups. If anything, this seems to me like a coup. I mean, if your definition of a coup is an illegitimate takeover of government functions or of government itself. I mean, we have a guy in the White House who's almost certainly there because a foreign government intervened in our election, or at least billionaires affiliated with a foreign government intervene in our election. And he's got Bill Barr doing, I mean, this is crazy stuff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
But it sure is a great way to distract us from the fact that person after person is testifying before the House that, yeah, in fact, crimes were committed by Donald Trump. And welcome back. Jeff in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Hey, Jeff, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Good talking to you. Good Friday to you. Me and you talked before about how farmers were getting hit by the renewable fuel standard by the EPA and also the trade war. And you asked me, how were the farmers acting and reacting? I believe the farmers now have found out they have been conned. I think they thought this trade thing was going to be resolved by now, where their markets could be stabilized. It's not.
It's harvest season now, right? Or are we past
that? Right, harvesting, and they're trying to get set up for next year. Thoughts and plans of how to plant, how many acres to plant, beans,
and
corn.
what to plant. Yeah.
Yes, very much so. And now they've learned that the EPA, because Jone and Chuck Grassley have told them that Trump's got this wonderful thing, and the EPA is going to, go back to the 15 billion gallons of ethanol to be mixed with the fuel. And now the EPA has come out with a new equation that may cut that standard way down. So they have been lied to over and over again.
Right.
And I think now they're finally figuring out this is becoming a joke for us.
Well, this is the power of the fossil fuel lobby, and and fossil fuel billionaires like Charles Koch. Is their influence on the EPA is substantial, and on this administration. So, given the choice between farmers who are producing ethanol, which actually reduces emissions from gasoline because it's mixed with the gasoline, versus oil companies that don't want the ethanol because it's diluting their profits essentially. The Trump administration is always going to choose the fossil fuel interests, and it looks like that's what's happened here, Jeff.
Yeah, well, what happened, Carl Icahn, when just after Trump was elected, had 2 refineries that he was a stockholder in and were setting idle. And he said, one thing I'm going to do, we're going to get our boy Scott Pruitt put in the EPA, and we're going to get rid of this renewable fuel standard because they didn't like it. Well, guess what? And guess who put Scott Pruitt in that position? Chuck Grassley and Jone Ernst, because they were both senators that voted to put these guys in. By
coincidence, your senator's from Iowa, one of the early primary states or caucus states. So how's that going to shake out politically, Jeff, in Iowa?
I think what it should do, that they should be going after Jone Ernst and really putting that to the forefront, that the people that are hurting the farmers are the people that they voted in.
Right, and she's up for re-election this year, isn't she? Chuck Grassley's retiring in 2 years. Am I remembering all that right?
I haven't heard anything about Chuck, but she is definitely up this year, and they should be going after the Democrats about this renewable fuel standard and how they've really lied to the farmers. But what's amazing is they're trying to dissociate the EPA from the Trump administration, like it was totally something separate.
Oh, that's those environmentalists over there. Jeff, does Jone Ernst have a strong Democratic challenger?
I think she's got 4 right now.
So there's a primary, a Democratic primary going on in Iowa. Fascinating. Okay, Jeff, thanks for the report from Iowa. I appreciate it. Fascinating stuff. Onward we go through the fog. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Very interesting. Another story I just wanted to mention, then I'll pick up your phone calls here. There is an article, I believe this was over at TPM that I saw this morning. It might have been The Guardian. That, no, it was Media Matters. It was Media Matters. In fact, let me just give you the exact headline, because I thought it was fascinating. The headline, Mark Zuckerberg spread misinformation about Facebook's fact-checking program during his congressional testimony. This was yesterday. Zuckerberg was testifying before Congress. Apparently, internal, right-wing executives at Facebook argued that the Daily Caller, which is about as far to the right as, Alternet or Raw Story are to the left, should be part of their fact-checkers. And, and they are now, but nobody on the left, to the best of my knowledge. I find that fascinating. I'm no longer able to have any, to know what's going on Facebook, because last week Facebook disabled my personal account. This is incredible. I've had this personal account, Thom Hartmann, T-H-O-M Hartmann. The one we have for the show is Thom_Hartmann. And, it's separately administered and all that kind of stuff. But, my Facebook account was private. It was just for, I was just followed family and friends. I followed people that I've known from college days. And, and I would only log on once or twice a week, if I was, caught a few minutes and just kind of catch up. So, but then, this thing came up and said, please upload your ID. And so I uploaded my driver's license like 5 different times. And then finally it said, your account's been disabled. That's it. If you want to download all your previous activity, you can do it here. I tried that, and it just kind of spun for a long time and then gave me an error message. It said, if you want to contest this, go here. I did that and sent a little message and got back an error message. So I got no Facebook. So I can't tell you about Facebook anymore. And it's good, and it's interesting because I've been thinking about this. Do I want to go to the trouble of begging Facebook to give me my account back? I'm not even sure that there's a way to do that. You know, I could find no specific feedback on their site, and I'm sure if I just call their main number, you know, I'd get laughed at. But do I want to do that? I mean, it is. I do have some distant cousins and some of my nephews and nieces who are pretty active on Facebook. The wife of one of my brothers does a kind of a daily blog that, you know, we're worth keeping up on. So on the one hand, is it worth trying to get that back? Versus on the other hand, is now a really good time to just say, okay, that's it. You know, I'll see you later, Facebook. You know, you dumped my account. You know, I don't think I can come back. So anyhow, I don't know. But it's being reported that Mark Zuckerberg was lying before Congress yesterday. Well, you know, I don't know if lying or disingenuous or what. But anyhow, Steve in Napa, California. Hey, Steve, thanks for listening to KBEW. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Originally called about Tulsi Gabbard, but you made a comment about the 17 intelligence agencies. I was wondering if I could respond to that.
Sure.
Yeah. So my understanding is that story first appeared New York Times, January of 2017, and then they retracted it a week or so later after Clapper came out and said that it wasn't a unanimous decision of the 17 intelligence agencies, and they were handpicked by Brennan of just 3 of the agencies.
Okay. Is it now unanimous among the agencies? Because my understanding is that it is now unanimous, the opinion.
Well, yeah, I'd like to know what the source of that would be. And then if I could just add that, you know, there are some of us on the left, I'm on the left, at least I consider myself on the left,
sure,
that are questioning Russiagate, you know, people like Aaron Mate, Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, Max Blumenthal. So, you know, maybe a small percentage, but we are out there questioning things. And from what I know, there's still nothing that connects WikiLeaks to this unless it's just some sort of inferential reasoning, no empirical evidence.
Okay, I'm looking at USA Today. This is Eliza Collins, USA Today, October 21st, 2018. Donald Trump claimed that the United States has no idea who's behind behind the email hacks. Is just not true. Fact-checking site website PolitiFact says Hillary Clinton is correct when she says 17 intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia's behind the hacking. So let me click through to PolitiFact and see what it says. And sure enough, PolitiFact is standing behind it. We've attached an update to this in response to reader queries after subsequent testimony by James Clapper. The original fact-check and rating remain unchanged. And
well, you know, I'd like to hear where Clapper changed his statement, because his statement after the January story came out in the New York Times was that it wasn't true.
They're not actually. PolitiFact isn't. This is Lauren Carroll at PolitiFact, which is, I believe, part of the Washington Post. They're quoting actually the agencies themselves. Air Force Intelligence, Army Intelligence, CIA, Coast Guard Intelligence, Defense Intelligence, Energy Department, Homeland Security, State Department, Treasury, Drug Enforcement, Federal Bureau, FBI, Marine Corps Intelligence, Geospatial Intelligence, National Reconnaissance Office, National Security Agency, Naval Intelligence, and Office of the Director of National Intelligence. There you go. Anyhow, I got to run. We're out of time, Steve. Thanks.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Oh, no, here it says the 17 agencies did not independently declare. It's unlikely. Yeah, okay, we'll be back. Stick around. Our book today is by Catherine Bailey. It's A Castle in Wartime, One Family, Their Missing Sons, and the Fight to Defeat the Nazis. It's an extraordinary and fascinating book. This is from the prologue. Dateline Innsbruck, Austria, 16 December 1944. Monica calling steamboat. This cryptic announcement, broadcast to Austria over the Voice of America, was received with relief by a handful of people able to decipher it. The coded message signaled that the Allies were still trying to infiltrate agents into Innsbruck to make contact with members of the Austrian resistance. It was 7 o'clock on a winter's morning, the gray old city walled in by snow-covered mountains. A roof of dense cloud hung over the domes and spires, cutting out the sky on the summit of the Nordkette. Towering 7,000 feet above the city, the sheer face of the mountain rose like a wall, blocking the north end of the fine Baroque streets. The illusion of being confined in a small space was maintained in the alleys and passageways in the medieval quarter. On a chill, gloomy day such as this, passing the tall, narrow-fronted Gothic houses, the sensation was of walking along the bottom of a ravine. Thick wreaths of smoke spiraled beneath the clouds. The day before, American planes had bombed the city, killing 259 people. In Herzog-Friedrichstrasse, a protective shroud covered the famous golden roof of the balcony designed for Emperor Maximilian in 1500. Beneath the bombed-out buildings, parties of children, drafted in from the villages along the valley, worked to clear the rubble. They were watched by small groups of SS soldiers who stood on the street corners guarding the defusing crews. Forcibly recruited from the nearby concentration camp at Reichenau, it was their job to deactivate the bombs that had failed to explode. The Allies were now convinced that Innsbruck, rather than the Reich capital of Berlin, was where the war was likely to culminate. Recent intelligence reports indicated that Hitler was building an Overfishing, an alpine fortress, Alpenfestung, in the mountains that encircled the city. Blueprints obtained by OSS operatives, the OSS is the forerunner of the CIA, point to a chain of underground factories and armories. It was to this remote, impregnable fortress that Hitler and a coterie of his most fanatical supporters intended to retreat when the Wehrmacht was beaten. From here, they would carry on the fight, defended by elite SS troops and sustained by huge stores of supplies that had been carefully stockpiled in bomb-proof caves. With Hitler holding the high ground, Allied military commanders were predicting that the battle to take the fortress could extend the war by up to 2 years and exact more casualties than all of the previous fighting on the Western Front. In these circumstances, intelligence from Innsbruck, the capital of the Overfishing, was suddenly at a premium. Alan Dulles, the OSS station chief in Switzerland, hoped to recruit a network of agents from within the city. Their job would be to supply hard military intelligence and assist the passage of U.S. and British forces when they reached the western border of Austria. But as Dulles recognized, Innsbruck was not fertile ground. That autumn, the Gestapo had arrested all known anti-Nazis. Moving from house to house, the mopping up operation signaled their determination to suppress all resistance operations in an area they looked upon as their last bastion. Soon after midday on 16 December, the U.S. Air Force returned to bomb the city for the 4th time that month. A sharp left rally was executed immediately after bombs away and a course flown around Innsbruck, the pilot reported. Due to undercast, no visual observation of results were possible. Some hours later, Frau Muttenschuldner, a resident of 47 years, sat down to write in her diary. "It is a black day for Innsbruck," she began. "The old city center has been hit, as well as the graveyard. Everyone feared there would be another raid, and sure enough, the enemy bombers came and wreaked their evil. There was no gas or water in the city, and the cemetery was now closed for burials. In the flat, dingy light, the only color was from the fires that had yet to be put out. Fraulein Kummer's photo studio is on fire," Frau Muttenschuldner reported. Vargar's paper warehouse, the stained glass factory at Müllerstrasse, Café Paul in Maximilianstrasse, and Hallensteiner's Gasthaus are all burning. Showers of sparks and burning paper are falling from the warehouse. One would marvel at the eerie beauty of it if it were not such a sad occasion. The raid marked a change of tactic. In addition to dropping 200 tons of bombs, the U.S. planes had dropped thousands of propaganda leaflets. In the coming weeks, they would drop thousands more. These and the messages broadcast on the BBC's Austrian service urged the city's inhabitants to rise up and prevent Hitler from making a last stand in the Tyrol. "Tyroleans, we know that you will not permit it. You will see to it that none of the Nazi leaders can hide. We know that already Tyroleans are fighting the Nazis everywhere. Even if the Nazis still feel secure in your country, we know better. You are on our side. But the vast majority of Tyroleans were not on the Allies' side. The book, A Castle in Wartime. Welcome back. Time for our science fact. Overfishing is huge, a huge problem. A new study shows that if we don't do anything or something, we will run out of seafood by 2048 in our children and grandchildren's lifetime. Fishing is now dominated by a gigantic modern fishing fleet with enough fishing capacity to consume all the fish on 4 Earth-like planets. Overfishing now outmatches the ocean's ability to renew the number of fish we consume. One thing you can do is only buy seafood from sustainable sources. The Marine Stewardship Council, for example, works to promote the best environmental choice in seafood through better product certification and eco-labeling. And of course, radically cut back on eating flesh foods, period. Anyhow, that's our science fact for the day. Back to Anything Goes Friday. Jonathan in Portland. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good.
So yesterday's discussion you had about healthcare, you had a physician on who was putting out a lot of disinformation, which you rightly did not believe. And I wanted to just flesh that out a bit. He was saying how 60,000 Canadians were leaving Canada to seek healthcare in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And it's a complete lie. It's put out by a conservative libertarian think tank called the Fraser Institute, and it's funded by the tobacco industry. And they've been putting out information, for instance, defending tobacco and poo-pooing the idea that it causes cancer. So the fact that a doctor is citing the Fraser Institute is pretty frightening.
Yeah.
There is a published peer-reviewed study. It's called Phantoms in the Snow. It was published in Health Affairs it's not too long ago, June of 2002, and it says exactly the opposite. It's a very well done study, and there's an expert in the field named Jeremy Snyder, who's a professor at in health sciences at Simon Fraser University in Canada, who can refute all of that.
Yeah, in that study, they surveyed 136 ambulatory care facilities in Michigan, New York, and Washington State, places that have borders with Canada. 80% of such facilities saw, on average, fewer than 1 Canadian per month. 40% had seen none in the preceding year.
Right.
Then the researchers looked at how Canadians were discharged over a 5-year period from acute care hospitals in the same 3 states. They found that more than 80% of those hospital visits, that is where Canadians actually went to an American hospital, were for emergency or urgent care. That is, they were tourists who had to go to the emergency room. Only 20% of the visits were for elective procedures or care. And,
right, and very likely the Canadian government paid for their emergency procedures.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
So, yeah, they also debunked this, the doctors are leaving Canada. There's there's a fascinating study on this. This is actually, somebody sent this to me yesterday, AARP.org, 5 myths about Canadian healthcare. And, it's actually a very pro-single-payer piece, which is surprising for AARP since they make so much of their money selling Medicare Advantage. The hip replacement thing. Todd Aitken from Missouri a couple of years ago took to the floor of the House and he says, I just hit 62 and I was just realizing that in Canada, if I had a bad hip, I wouldn't be able to get that hip replacement because I'm too old. I'm an old geezer now and not worth a government bureaucrat to pay to get my hip fixed, which is just a complete lie. So the St. Louis Post-Dispatch looked into it and said, and I quote, at least 63% of hip replacements performed in Canada last year were on patients aged 65 or over, and more than 1,500 of those, it turned out, were on patients over 85 or older. In other words, Canada doesn't deny hip replacements to older people. And by the way, in the United States, who gets the most hip replacements? Older people. Who pays for it? Medicare. What's Medicare? A single-payer system. So.
Well, and I just want to say, like I've lived in Sweden for a long time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they brag about is if someone's very sick, like if they have cancer, they send them to the United States. They pay for it, because they think that think they have a treatment that's superior they just send them to where they think the best treatment is.
Right. If there's some sort
we don't do that.
Yeah, novel or experimental thing or what. Yeah, no, we say
no,
you're
I'm
on
not
your
talking
own,
even about novel or experimental. I'm just talking about, mainstream stuff.
Yeah.
I think the one thing to think about, and this has nothing to do with insurance per se, but you're probably familiar with the study that Barbara Starfield came out in 2010, published in JAMA, or it was in 2000, I think, published in JAMA, that talked about iatrogenic deaths. So these were like at least 100,000, right, people dying every year due to prescription drugs just prescribed in hospitals. So that's the other side of the coin, is that once we start getting health care paid for, then we got to start talking about, dealing with the idea that some of these interventions can be harming us.
Yeah. Good stuff. Jonathan, thank you. Appreciate the call. John in Dublin, Florida. Hey, John, or Donovan, Florida. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey there. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
Dunedin, Florida. Anyway,
Okay.
I've been scanning the news, trying to find a list of those Republicans who stormed the skiff. I'd really like to know whether my representative was among them.
I printed that list out yesterday, and I've
nice.
got it. I've got it right here. Hang on just a minute. Oh, my God, I can't read the type. It's very small. Actually, there's two long lists, and I'm not sure if it's, and they're not alphabetical. One is the ones who have access to the skiff. The second is the list who stormed the skiff, and then the third are the ones who both have access and stormed the skiff. Those people, the super hypocrites, the ones who actually kind of left the room so that they could invade the room.
Right.
That was Paul Gosar, Mark Meadows, Jody Heiss, Ralph Norman, Carol Miller, Mark Green, Scott Perry, Lee Zedlin, Ken Buck, Ron Wright, and Steve Watkins. But the other longer list, I don't want to read the whole list, but I can't tell you right off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Where did you get this list?
This was printed. Where was this? Somebody reprinted it yesterday on Democratic Underground, and I don't know where they got it from.
Okay.
Because I only printed this, a fragment of the page that had the names on it. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, I like to hold my representative accountable. But, I haven't found the list yet.
Yeah, I would think with a little searching you can find it. But John, thank you for the call. Dennis in Bergenfield, New Jersey. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'd like to have a long conversation today about taxes. Do you agree with Ocasio with the 70% marginal tax rate on all wealth over $10 million?
I don't disagree with it.
Mm-hmm. How would you respond to conservatives who say that it's wrong for the government to take 70% of wealth because that person basically earned it, and if the government does that, it's tyrannical?
I would say that when you're earning wealth at that level, you are earning wealth in large part because of government. You are at that level, you are earning wealth because you're making heavy use of the commons, you're making heavy use of the court system, you're making heavy use of patent and trademark laws. These are legal monopolies that are provided by government. That I think that argument's fairly easy to make, and that's traditionally been an argument that everybody understood. And then the other part of it is that we had that tax rate. In fact, it was at 91%. Is where it started, and then it went down to 74% in 1967. But from the 1930s and really the early 1940s, as we went into World War II, from that point all the way up until 1983, I think it was, that Reagan dropped it down to 25%. During that time period, when we had a top marginal tax rate that kicked in at way below $10 or $20 million. I mean, it kicked in at around the equivalent of $3 million in today's money. That when we had that top marginal tax rate, the outcome that it produced for our society was that the bottom 98% of Americans, 95% of Americans saw their income growing actually faster than the top 5% of Americans, although the top 5% of Americans, their income was growing at a healthy clip too. We went from fewer than 50% of Americans being in the middle class to more than 60% of Americans being in the middle class. We democratized our country. We healed a lot of divisions. We educated people. We built infrastructure with that money. We became a force for good in many ways around the world. Yeah, we screwed a lot of things up too. I'll give you that. But the bottom line is that it was better for us as a country. And CEOs are doing just fine. I mean, the average CEO is making 30 times what their most lowly paid employee is making, and that was plenty.
I think it's actually 200 times.
Say
200 to 400. I think it's about 200 times the CEO to
well, right now, it depends on the industry that you're looking at. The average is around 500 times, but there are some industries like in banking where it's over 10,000 times. But prior to, but that's only because the tax rate has gone down so much. Back when the top tax rate was between 70 and 90%, people would make up to the point where that tax rate started kicking in, $2-3 million a year in today's dollars. And at that point, they would say, let's reinvest the money in the company. Let's pay our employees better. Let's develop new products. Let's improve the products we have. And that's exactly what happened. And once Reagan cut those tax rates down radically, and they've been reduced even more ever since then. But once Reaganomics kicked in, what happened was everybody was like, hey, let's just grab all the money we can. And let's get everything we can, and off we go with it. So anyhow, well, Dennis, thank you for the call. I'm sorry we're hitting a break here. Not enough time for a debate or a discussion. Victoria Jones, by the way, is going to drop by in about 4 minutes. We're going to talk a little Brexit update. We'll be right back. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for we the people. And welcome back. Patrick in San Antonio. By the way, I looked through 3 or 4 more articles about 17 intelligence agencies, and it turns out that 4 intelligence agencies that actually have, Russia as part of their purview have definitely concluded this. All the rest of them said that, we just didn't do the investigation, so don't talk to us. Patrick, to you.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just looking at Clapper's statements. According to what he was saying, it was NSA, FBI, and CIA, handpicked by Brennan, were the actual people that looked into the report that was completed by CrowdStrike. There was no government agency that ever actually inspected the DNC server. According to legal documents,
actually, the FBI has a clone of the server, Patrick.
So
you can inspect a clone just as easily as you can inspect the server. You're splitting hairs the way
Okay.
using the kind of logic that I'm getting over at Fox News. What's the deal?
According to legal documents, CrowdStrike only provided the government agencies a draft analysis.
No, the FBI got a clone of the server. But are you trying to argue that the DNC hacked themselves?
Well, according to William Binney, the NSA whistleblower, a real whistleblower, actually stated that the download speed at which emails were downloaded happened too quick, that it's likely whoever downloaded the emails did it directly from the server, not halfway across the world.
Yeah, I remember.
Look into William Binney. He was the one that exposed the WMDs in Iraq. Him and his crew exposed that lie, and he's doing so again. This is what Jimmy Dore and all these other guys on the web have been exposing for a long time.
Okay. Patrick, thanks a lot. Where's Patrick's number here? Let's see. Oh, interesting. A restricted call. Patrick doesn't call again. I'm so tired of this stuff. These right-wing nuts getting on here. Jack in Henderson, Nevada. Hey, Jack, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you for being our voice, first of all.
You're welcome.
What I don't understand, I've watched a lot of news lately, and nobody seems to be putting everything together. Everything this man has done, I hate to even call him president, has some Russian influence. The recent thing with the Biden memo and all of that, if you really look at it, he held that money a lot longer than the phone call. And he was holding it. What was it for? It was for arms to fight the Russians.
Right.
The move out of Syria. Who's benefiting that? The Russians moved right in. They moved into our bases.
Right.
I was in the 82nd Airborne. That makes me so mad to know somebody's, just taking over our equipment and our bases. That, and this guy is the closest thing to a Manchurian Candidate that, it's kind of like storybook from the movie.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why the press hasn't put more of this together.
I don't understand why the Republicans, who are always hysterical about the Soviet Union and about Russians, are so in on this. The whole thing is just baffling to me. Jack, thanks a lot for the call. I got to run. We'll be back. Victoria Jones is going to drop by in just a moment. Stick around. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Victoria Jones on the line with us from New York City. Or are you in Washington, D.C., Victoria?
I am in the swamp.
In the swamp in D.C., okay. So, there's been all this news about Brexit and about, Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and that he's going to have a snap election and all. What's the bottom line here? What's going on in the U.K. and how might that affect the United States?
Well, there's two main questions there. What is going on in the UK is that as we head into the weekend, the Brexit is at an impasse because Boris Johnson is refusing to proceed with his withdrawal agreement until Parliament agrees to an election on December the 12th. So that's one thing. And there was a threat to shut down government, which was like, really? And then he said, no, I'm not threatening to do that. Meanwhile, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, which is the left-wing party, he's refusing to go forward with this election until Boris Johnson rules out a no-deal Brexit and the European Union grants a UK extension. So that's two things, because Jeremy Corbyn and a lot of other people don't trust Boris Johnson not to crash out of the EU with a hard Brexit. Meanwhile,
may I pause you for a moment?
Yes.
Crashing out of the UK without any kind of deals in place, it seems like the trade side of that would probably get resolved fairly quickly, as companies and countries are going to want to do business with each other, and there'll be a lot of pressure to make that happen. Right. It seems like the real crisis would be that Northern Ireland might end up having to erect a border between themselves and Ireland for the purposes of customs duty, but that border could become a new war zone. I mean, I was there back when it was a war zone. Louise and I got chased out of Derry, as I recall, by a bunch of soldiers, with a machine gun in the back of their Jeep. Do I have that right, that that's the biggest concern?
Yeah.
And that's the main thing that they want to negotiate, is how do we deal with the fact that Northern Ireland and Ireland are all on the same island, but politically and religiously they are radically different places? Yeah,
the border in Ireland is one of the key sticking points. And it's really unspoken a lot of the time, but national security and violence, potential violence in Ireland, is undercutting all of this. There is a real fear that trouble's back, and they've got to face that and deal with it sensibly, and they're really not. Yeah.
Okay. So I interrupted you in midstream. Continue.
No, I was. Well, the EU is supposed to say on Monday whether it will grant an extension and until when, but they may not say on Monday. That might drift. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson said today that, oh, yes, we may still leave the European Union on Halloween, which, of course, is next week. And remember, he said he'd rather be dead in a ditch than not leave on Halloween. I think a lot of people are digging ditches for him right now. I do want to mention a new poll that's come out that's very disturbing, which says that a slight majority of people, but 71% actually, leave voters, and in the 50s of Remain voters, say that violence against MPs is a price worth paying in order to get their way on Brexit.
MPs being members of parliament. So violence against legislators is a price worth paying. 70% of Brits are saying that?
That's the highest number, but in the 50s...
well, even 50s. This is pretty amazing.
Yes. That's how frustrated people are.
If there was to be another vote on Brexit today in the United Kingdom, how do you think it would go?
I think that it would probably fail. I think it would be Remain in low numbers if young people turned out. I think it would.
Yeah, your phone is breaking up, Victoria.
Yeah, I think it would probably fail.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, all right. So where you said that it's, Boris Johnson is still saying he might leave at the end, basically, on Halloween. What kind of probabilities do you assign to that?
Almost zero. His Treasury Secretary said this morning that that's not going to happen. It just cannot happen.
Right. So what if the European Union doesn't grant an extension, or have they already done that?
Oh, they will grant an extension. I think the question is how long. They're very ticked off. The French are not on the same page as everybody else. They're the ones who are saying, I don't see why we should grant the Brits an extension unless, and then there are various conditions. But everybody else is willing to grant some kind of extension.
Does this go back to 1099? Is that the deal? It's like...
Yeah, basically.
It's all about the Norman invasion.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. So, how will this affect the United States, whether or not, if Brexit happens or not? I mean, why should Americans care about this?
Americans should care about this both from the national security point of view and in terms of cooperation, and also in terms of trade. President Trump has said that there will be a lot of trade deals with Britain. We don't know whether that's true. And we don't know who they're going to benefit, whether they will, in fact, benefit the United States. Also, if there is a hard crash, it will impact the stock markets badly.
Are you sure? Because there have been, the British stock market has not been badly impacted up to this point. I mean, there's a line of thinking, I read it in the Financial Times, that, we'll just make it through.
Well, we do believe in soldiering on, getting on with it.
There is the stiff upper lip. There is a long British tradition. So when will we know what's going on?
That is, if I could answer that, I would get Halloween Witch of the Year. I think we'll know something on Monday, to be honest with you. I do.
Interesting. Okay. Victoria Jones, thanks for the update, Victoria.
Thank you.
It's great to hear your voice again. Nice talking with you. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program in just a moment or two. It's talk media for the sane left among us. Stick around, we'll be right
back. You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stop Being Reasonable, How We Really Change Our Minds by Eleanor Gordon Smith. This is from the introduction. Somewhere in the technological belt of California, where the only thing more precisely engineered than the software is the people, or maybe the people's teeth, lives an organization called the Center for Applied Rationality. For the low price of $3,900, the center will sell you a 4-day workshop on reasoning, during which participants eat, sleep, and take part in 9 hours of back-to-back activities together daily under one, presumably rationally designed roof. This year, like every other year, the center will receive hundreds of applications from people who want to attend because, as they put it, everyone I know is irrational and I want to fix them. These folks make for an easy punchline, a good group to laugh at, but it turns out many of us make a version of the same mistake when we think about persuasion. We think we know what it is to change our minds rationally, and the only question is why other people don't do it more often. The ideal mind change is calm. It reacts to reasoned argument. It responds to facts, not to our sense of self or the people around us. It resists the siren song of emotion. People like to talk about the public sphere, if there is such a thing. Then its convex edge reflects this idealized image back at us. Think of the number of programs dedicated to the mind-changing magic of two sides saying opposite things. Meet the Press, State of the Union, Face the Nation. The branding of these things often bakes in a little reward. How brave I am for attending the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. How clever for my subscription to the Intelligence Squared debates. The proper way to reason, at least according to our present ideal, is to discard ego and emotion and step into a kind of disinfected argumentative operating theater where the sealed air conditioning vents stop any everyday fluff from floating down and infecting the sterilized truth. Years ago, I used to share this view. I'll tell you why, even though it will rightly want to make you take my lunch money. When I was in school, I was a champion debater, which was another way of saying I spent my weekends wearing a blazer and telling people in precisely timed intervals exactly how wrong they were. My teammates and I constructed arguments for 20 hours a week, putting premises in the crosshairs with the unblinking accuracy of people whose whole egos were on the line. We weren't bad either. Eventually, we made it to the World Championships in Qatar, where we wore blazers embroidered with the Australian coat of arms in gold and competed in what looked, in hindsight, like a scene in an apocalypse movie just before the purge begins. All of us in matching uniforms on fleets of white buses being shepherded through the desert haze to auditoriums where we would sit locked up together for an hour, surrounded by stopwatch-wielding officials. Debating left me with an attitude toward persuasion that was as precise as Euclidean geometry. Find the foundation, show why it's wrong. Buttress analysis with evidence. Emotion is for decorative flourishes only. Do not expect it to be load-bearing. Of course, I knew you could change minds by appealing to things like emotion or your opponent's sense of self, but doing that seemed kind of base. It felt nobly sportsmanlike to arm yourself with argument alone. It was the intellectual equivalent of turning up at dawn for your duel with your pistols shined and paces counted. It was how you were meant to fight. This perspective began to change after I produced a piece for the radio show This American Life in 2016. The idea had seemed simple. Turn around to my own catcallers, men who had wolf whistled or made sexual comments to me on the street, and try to reason them out of doing it again. I spent hours giving these men all the evidence, all the reasoning, all the fancy footwork with premises. But after dozens of conversations, I walked away defeated. Over and over again, they walked away from our conversations as sure as they'd ever been that it was okay to grab, yell at, or follow women on the street. These men didn't seem fundamentally irrational or unstuck from reality. In fact, in a funny sort of way, I quite liked a few of them. One told me he modeled his courtship rituals on the animal kingdom. I'm just another paradise bird flaunting my stuff, he said triumphantly, as though this explained everything that needed to be explained. That's a good line. He made me laugh, but I couldn't change their minds. The experience deflated me, not just as a person and as a woman, but as someone who has always been optimistic about our ability to talk each other into better beliefs. We finished recording in November 2016, right after the U.S. general election, which set up a grim backdrop for a newly found pessimism toward rational debate and persuasion. But when the piece aired, a strange thing happened. I was inundated with interview requests. Could I write a 10-step guide to changing minds? Would I accept an award for the successful use of rational persuasion in public? What advice did I have for talking people out of being workplace harassers? I was astonished. Large numbers of people had apparently listened to my conversations with catcallers on the radio, conversations that I had walked away from feeling dejected and defeated, and heard instead instances of persuasive success. I think the explanation is that these conversations bore a sort of Madame Tussauds-like resemblance to what we think good mind changes look like. I said one thing, my catcaller said the opposite thing, and each of us tried to explain why we were right. I had stayed calm. They had been prepared to hear me out. I had used statistics. It looked for all the world like a rational debate, and the fact that I had failed to change any minds with this approach disappeared under the shadow of the unquestioned assumption that I deserved congratulations for even trying. I started to smell a rat. The book Stop Being Reasonable by Eleanor Gordon Smith. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. A rat. The book Stop Being Reasonable by Eleanor Gordon Smith.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday. It turns out that Matt Getz, one of the guys who led that stunt where they barged into the skiff, well, I need not recap the whole thing. I'm guessing you know what I'm talking about. He has now a Democratic challenger. Democratic candidate Phil Ayer, EHR, is going to take him on. Phil is a father, husband, community volunteer, and U.S. Navy veteran who rose from seaman to commander in a 26-year active duty career with the Navy. He flew reconnaissance missions in the Cold War, Desert Storm, and after 9/11, led special products and provided strategic advice to senior leaders in Washington, London, and NATO. He's running to restore honor and leadership to Congress. Wow. EHR4, F-O-R, Congress.com is the website if you're interested in learning more about his campaign and candidacy. Anyhow, Anything Goes Friday. Mary in Burlington, North Carolina. Hey, Mary, what's on your mind today?
I just wanted to tell you that I called my representative, Mark Walker, and I was talking to the girl, and I told her I'm very ashamed of what he did. It was really ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And so she said, but the Democrats changed the rules. I said, no, they didn't. And she hung up in my face.
Wow. I'm not surprised. I mean, these rules that they're operating under are actually the ones that Paul Ryan and Mark Meadows and those guys put into place to facilitate the Benghazi hearings in 2015. Those are the rules that are still in place.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
I was just shocked. She just hung up in my face. I couldn't get over that.
Amazing. Mary, thank you for the call. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Right.
Who is your representative, by the way?
Mark Walker.
Mark Walker.
Mark
Okay,
Walker
great.
from North Carolina.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good to hear from you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Tim in South Bend, Indiana. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for letting me talk to you. I called yesterday, but I didn't get through. I was listening to everything about the insurance and Medicare and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. I'm considered to say I'm on disability, but have absolutely no insurance because I was kicked off the state insurance, which was Medicaid, months ago. So anyway, I called the Medicare office itself direct and said I wanted the Part A and Part B, and I mentioned to them that I knew that there was that part. Was it Part D is your pharmaceutical drugs, but it still has the donut hole.
Right.
And so I told them, I said I wasn't happy with that, but I did want to stick with Medicare, period, based upon what you folks had said.
Right. You should get Part D,
well,
too, because it'll pay for some of your drugs.
Yeah, and
doesn't
that's
cost
the
anything
thing.
more.
Well, it's kind of crazy because for some reason, we were on the air, we were talking for 3 hours, and he did most of the talking. And I think part of it was he admitted that his computer kept crashing every so often, so he was kind of just talking about his life and all that stuff. But when things finally finished up after 3 hours, he said, "I got just the thing for you. It's so perfect, and it'll give you dental, I think vision, and no hearing, but it'll cover. Oh, it's perfect. But it was an Aetna PPO." Which is a Medicare Advantage.
Right. Are you sure you were calling Medicare and that you weren't like, I mean, I see ads on TV, call the Medicare hotline or helpline or whatever, and it's not actually the Medicare, it's not the government agency. It's a company that's selling Medicare Advantage plans, and they're making you think it's Medicare?
No, I'm positive it was the Medicare because I took it off my Medicare health insurance card.
Wow.
I mean, it was direct off the card, and then he also gave me. I asked him, about Medigap policies, and he actually gave me 3 companies, and he said, "You want to get on the Plan F?" And he said, "But you have to call them direct. I can't help you here."
Right. That's true.
He then said, talk to them, and he says, do it, get the Plan F right away because it's not available after January 1st of 2020.
That's correct.
But he said you will be, I'd be grandfathered in, and I could always renew it.
Right, once you've got F. And F has 0 deductible. Now, F has been replaced by, I think it's like E or something that's got like a small deductible, like $150 a year, but it's $150 a year less expensive. So it's kind of a difference without a distinction, or whatever the phrase is. But in any case,
which one was that? You said E? You said E?
I did, but don't take my word for it. I don't remember. But you can look at a list of the plans. But that's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Medicare Advantage is called Medicare Part C, and it is promoted by Medicare. I mean, the way that they wrote the laws back, in 2005 when the Bush administration did this, was to kind of seamlessly integrate it with Medicare. Of course, they're being paid out of Medicare funds, and when you get your Medicare and you book every year, it's got all those plans for your particular state in it. And I would refer you to that book. But that's interesting. Tim, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. That was a fascinating one. Mark in Woodstock, New York. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing today?
I'm well. Get your mouth closer to the microphone, please. What's up?
Okay, how's this?
Much better.
Okay, sorry. I'm a parent of an adult daughter with severe autism, and I'm concerned about nobody ever mentions politicians or anything mention people with developmental disabilities. Mm-hmm. And the people that work with my daughter are making like $12.30 an hour. They're doing life and death work to work with people with disabilities. I mean, my daughter lives in a group home with 5 other women, and all of them require complete help with all aspects of their life. And no politicians ever mention anything about people with disabilities.
Right. And the reason why is because it's not a large enough voting block that any politician really cares. The only politicians who care about disabled people are politicians who are doing it out of ethics and morality rather than pure partisan interest.
Well, Tom, approximately 10% of the population of the United States have some sort of either developmental disability or physical disability. So if you multiply that out, plus the people who are their families and the people that work with them, it is quite a large block of people.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Do they vote?
Most of them do. Well, the people with developmental disabilities, most likely, depending upon the severity of the disability. My daughter is a nonverbal woman. She has no conception about what voting, politicians are, or anything like that. So I'm going to say that the majority of them probably don't vote.
Yeah.
But the people who work with them, their families and all that are a voting bloc.
You're right. The people around them. So the bottom line here, Mark, is you're calling for more politicians to pay attention to this issue and start doing the right thing for people with disabilities.
Exactly, and the people who work with people with disabilities.
Yeah, got it. Well said. And hopefully your message gets heard, Mark. Thank you for listening on WIOF, and thanks for the call. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's up?
Hi, Dr. Tom. Long time no talk.
Yeah, how are you?
Yeah, okay. Anyway, earlier you had a caller named Jack talking about the base in Turkey, and I'm glad to know that I'm not the only one worrying about this. That base was originally put in there to protect against communist aggression after World War II.
You're talking about the NATO base in Turkey where the U.S. has nuclear weapons. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's not our base anymore. It's now a Russian base. And if people would pull up a map, if you stop and think about the fact that Putin already has Crimea and the Black Sea, and how you get from the Mediterranean to the Black Sea, this was a strategic point during World War II. And I guess people have forgotten that, you know, up at Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania, there's also another Russian piece of property, Kaliningrad, that we have always suspected has a submarine base.
Kaliningrad. I've been there.
Kaliningrad, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it used to be called Königsberg when the Germans owned it. Now it's Kaliningrad.
Yes, and this gives Putin a good strategic outlook on taking over Europe again if we should go back to war, because we'll no longer have control over anything on either direction.
Yeah.
Am I the only paranoid person on this planet that owns a map?
Well, I don't know. I'm very hopeful that, you know, long before we get to any kind of consideration of anything that even resembles a war, that there can be some sort of a detente between the United States and Russia and the EU and Russia. And, you know, I mean, there have been a lot of mistakes made on both sides, and I could identify them. But, you know,
can you remember Herzegovina, Slovenia, Croatia?
Bosnia,
and, yeah, Slovenia is right there, all of it.
Yep.
And who got new citizenship last year? Yeah, Melania's parents got out, didn't they?
Oh, Melania's parents, yeah, that was for Slovenia, you know.
Slovenia, yeah, it's in the same area.
Yeah, they came in as, I guess she's the...
chain.
Chain migration. Yeah, thank you very much, Norma. That's Donald Trump's favorite phrase, right? Chain migration. And of course,
I think we need to pay attention to what's going on over there.
Yeah, and there's some reporter out there who's offering a $10,000 bonus to any reporter who will ask Donald Trump to his face how his wife got into the United States on a Genius visa.
I saw that. I read it.
Yeah, that should be fascinating. Norma, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you again. It is 16 minutes. Well, it's coming up on 17 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to share a little bit of something about my own personal experience with government medical care.
Okay.
My father was a lifer in the Air Force, and so I, as a dependent child, was able to utilize the veterans' medical, and it was excellent.
And still is, apparently.
It's excellent. And so people saying, well, it's going to be, if we go into Medicare for all, it'll be just like the government-run health care. Fine, great, I hope it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I now go to a cooperative here in Burlington, Vermont. I go to a cooperative for my medical and dental, and it's tremendous. I just wanted to make that comment.
Cool. Well, thank you.
But I just
and put in a vote for the medical system. Good one. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Okay.
Thanks. I appreciate your comments. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. Hey, Jill, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Wow, just listening to people devastated by just being sick is horrifying. And Bernie Sanders with his Medicare for all, health care for all is awesome. I'm promoting Move to Amend, which, of course, is the We the People amendment. Mm-hmm. This amendment distinguishes all other amendments because everybody wants to say free speech is not money, but Move to Amend is saying corporations are not persons.
Right.
And when I listen to the people that are suffering, when we say corporations, we're talking about private corporations. I mean, and these people, this is a corporation. There are people behind this that are just not caring. And Move to Amend is the only organization that's going to regulate corporations, to say that they don't have the same rights as a person.
Yeah, for people who don't know what we're talking about, Jill, if I may real quickly, movetoamend.org, M-O-V-E-T-O, amend, movetoamend.org, is an organization that for years and years has worked with a whole bunch of other organizations, by the way, Public Citizen, for example, citizen.org, and has come up with a constitutional amendment that would reverse two doctrines of law that were created out of whole cloth by the Supreme Court. Something, by the way, the Supreme Court doesn't have the authority to do, but they did it anyway. The first is that corporations are persons and therefore entitled to rights under the First, Fourth, Fifth, and 14th Amendments of the Constitution. And secondly, that money is the same thing as free speech, and therefore when a billionaire owns a politician, or if a billionaire wants to own 100 politicians, that billionaire is merely exercising his right of free speech, and that's constitutionally protected by the First Amendment. No politician has ever advocated or voted for these ideas. These came out of 5 right-wingers on the Supreme Court in 2 different situations. So, yeah, it's...
That's right.
Move
That's
to amend.org.
Right. And let's get Bernie. Let's get Bernie to sign on.
Yeah, and Bernie's in favor of it. I think right across the board, I would be surprised if there are any Democrats anymore who aren't in favor of at least some variation on this. There you go.
Bernie introduced this into the Senate.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Jill, thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Trump now is... And Linda in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Linda, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to chime in on your discussion a little while ago about the Medicare supplement. Mm-hmm. Pardon me?
Yes. Go for it.
Okay. The one that is replacing Plan F.
Right.
I got Plan G, which covers everything that F covers except the $185 Medicare Part B deductible.
Okay, so G is the one that replaces F, not E. I was unsure, but G, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that, Linda. Thank you.
Well, what I might also say is that people should really look at G instead of F if they're on F, because in my city, to get the F plan, it costs $50 a month more than the G plan.
So you actually save money with the G.
$600 a year to cover $185.
Yeah, there you go. With the G plan, you're actually saving money, even though you're having a small deductible. Yeah, makes sense.
Right. I paid that $185 in January, and then the rest of the year, nothing.
Yeah. Okay, so check it out. Linda, thank you for the heads up on that. I really appreciate it. I'm telling you, I've got the smartest listeners of any radio show on earth, and I so appreciate your calling in. Linda, thank you. Carol in Monessen, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Just fine, yes. What's up?
Okay, yeah, I have had the exact same Facebook experience that you had.
Really?
And I have never been able to get it back. I've done everything. I've spent in excess of $350 trying to get it back with 3 different computer experts. And nothing has worked. It still comes up, your account has been disabled.
Right.
And I tried to even set up a new Facebook page because I miss commenting on your show there. Mm-hmm. And no, it won't let me do that either. So I think it's permanent.
Did you have more than one Facebook account?
No, just one, and I had it for years. And although the people listening to me now on your comment page probably have read some of the stuff on it.
Right.
And I never said anything that I found to be a security risk, but there you go.
Were you left-wing politically active on your Facebook page?
Oh, very much so, yes. Very much so.
I wasn't, because I was just basically lurking, keeping track of my family and a couple of friends. But I in the last month or 3, I had liked a few left-wing memes, which I hadn't done in the 10 or 12 or 15 years I'd had that Facebook account before. So I don't know if that has something to do with it or not. I just don't know. It's a very strange thing, and it's a very black box company. I mean, it's very hard to get in touch with anybody there. So, Carol,
it really is. You can't.
Yeah,
you can't.
Yeah. If you figure out how to get your account back, let me know, and if I figure out, I'll announce it on the air. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Carol. Good to hear from you. Bye-bye. Russell in Griffith, Indiana. Hey, Russell, what's up?
Yeah. My comment is about the same as the other callers there. When they shut down social media accounts, they're going to shut down the media. That's what they're going to do.
Well, social media has become a good chunk of the media. Something like 30% of Americans get their news off Facebook now.
That's what I'm saying. They can just pick and choose who they want on their social media platform. This is shutting down social media.
Right, and they can. I mean, these are private for-profit companies. They're not government, they're not regulated like utilities. They're not regulated as Title II common carriers, for example, although I think maybe you could make an argument for that. But I doubt it would go anywhere. But they're private companies. They can say, we don't want you as a customer. Very easy. It's totally legal.
Yeah, but they have Trump on there. They have other news medias on there and everything else.
Yeah.
And then they just shut down other people.
Yeah. No, they're apparently good with the right-wingers. Russell, thank you for the call. Your point is well taken. I'm not sure what to do about it, but your point is well taken. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes Friday, in the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And hey, tell your friends, however you're hearing our show, there's probably a lot of other good progressive programming there. Tell your friends about it. Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. Devoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, Devoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for corporations and absentee landlords who practiced, quote, an economy of liquidation. He was broad in his assault on the liquidators. He went after the timbermen, the mining companies, the stockmen, the cattle barons, the oilmen and gasmen, the overgrazers, the deforesters, the denuders, the profiteers of gold rushes and grass rushes. He named the bankers and congressmen who abetted the plundering, the Western hogs, he called them. They've been busy for a century laying waste to the West. Long before the public domain was vested with any permanence legally in the hands of the American people, before there was a consideration of the land itself or any environmental ethic, the West had been torn up, beaten down, subjected to the greed and profligacy of the commodity users. Ironically, the users, in their race to liquidate, helped drive the creation of the public land system we know today, as they proved the need for federal stewardship to stop their abuses. Massive timber frauds in the 19th century, the largest land frauds seen in the West, led directly to the establishment of the Forest Service in the 20th century, its purpose to stop deforestation. Out-of-control cattle numbers in the steppe, overgrazing that turned the fragile soil to dust, led directly to the federal grazing regulatory system that eventually became the BLM. When in 1946 the commodity users conspired to destroy the public land system, the system in which Devoto saw the only hope for Western conservation and preservation, he stood to oppose them. Quote, he was the first conservationist in nearly half a century, except for Franklin D. Roosevelt, to command a national audience, said Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., a student of his at Harvard. No one did more in the post-war years to rouse public opinion against the spoilers than Devoto. Devoto and Schlesinger had seen firsthand what unregulated industry could wreak in the arid lands when they drove cross-country together in the spring of 1940 and entered western Kansas past the 100th meridian. These were the last years of the Dust Bowl before FDR's soil conservation programs and the return rains of the 40s could heal the land. Wrote Devoto, a cemetery was 10 inches deep in sand. Half the headstones had toppled into it and been partly covered. Sagging shacks that had been farmhouses had their windows blown out, and dust was 2 or 4 or 6 feet deep against their western walls and a foot deep against the far wall. A repulsive dust as fine as sifted flour. Now, 6 years after that trip with Schlesinger, Devoto was confronted with the West's cattle barons, the liquidators of the grass, who were hell-bent on reducing the region to the same mess of dust. In 1946, the Joint Committee on Public Lands of the American National Livestock Association met in Salt Lake City to discuss the goal of undermining what few regulations had been placed on livestock operators under the newly formed Bureau of Land Management. The stock growers' ambition went further than mere deregulation. They hatched a plan with the help of friends in Congress to begin moving all federal land, the BLM and Forest Service domain, as well as the national parks, into the control of the states. The plan evolved through 1946, 47, 48, with legislation making its way on Capitol Hill. Devoto covered the story for Harper's. He cautioned that the stock growers were attempting, quote, one of the biggest land grabs in American history. The public lands are first to be transferred to the states on the wholly justified assumption that there should be a state government not wholly compliant to the desires of stock growers. It could be pressured into compliance, he wrote in Harper's. Nothing in history suggests the states are adequate to protect their own resources or even want to, or suggests that cattlemen and sheepmen are capable of regulating themselves even for their own benefit, still less the public's, end quote. The long-term plan, he said, was to get rid of the public lands altogether, to place the common possession of the American people into private hands. The livestock industry went on the attack, mounted a PR campaign to discredit Devoto, and pressured Harper's to cease its support. Unmoved, the magazine continued for 3 years to publish his relentless exposés of the intrigues in the state houses and in the Western Caucasus. Devoto had convinced the editors, when no other publication that mattered in the East cared, that the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday, and we are taking your call. Don in Akron, Ohio. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom.
Hey, Don.
I just wanted to bring up something I recollect from a call given by Noam Chomsky, and that is in about 1996, the late 90s, during Clinton's administration, that Clinton and the government favored Boris Yeltsin as the head of the old Soviet Union in Russia. And they used their influence, which I think is considerable. But anyway,
the Soviet Union had already been broken up by then, hadn't it?
You know, I'm not sure.
I thought they broke up in 91.
And in any case, well, actually, you're probably right. Yeah, I think you are. But in any case, it was Russia. But in any case, Chomsky says that Yeltsin, who had some defects or perceived defects, alcoholism and others, would be more useful asset.
Yeah.
And so the CIA, which is very good at this and does this type of thing a lot, used its weight to help get him installed, and probably are mostly responsible for his being installed as the head of Russia. Yeah. And just in a nutshell, Chomsky goes on and says that the state of Israel has very explicit and open, nothing secretive about it, working to influence elections and other aspects of U.S. politics, and that the corporations, multinational corporations, also buy and orchestrate U.S. elections. So in that context, he thinks that the whole Russiagate thing is sort of a naive joke. He's surprised that people would fall for it.
Yeah. Don, here we have it. It's real interesting. And I'm going to make a note here on, somehow that flipped over to Denise. Okay, well, I'll do that when I get off the air. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, I'm telling you, my friends tease me that the black helicopters are coming for me because I call Congress so many times. And this engine of evil that has become the Trump administration just seems to keep ignoring. They're so corrupt, and now this latest Department of Justice probe into criminal offenses is like, when do they stop? It's how can we get through this? Why isn't he getting impeached quicker?
Well, they have to build a case that he is worthy of impeachment. I think the evidence is obvious and it's all around us, but it has to be done the way it has to be done. It's just
I know. It's just that they keep coming up with more lies, and the people are so gullible to his lies.
Oh, they're throwing all kinds of stuff out here. You get these essentially useful idiots calling up and going, oh, there's no there. And then you get the Republicans in Congress going, how dare they be talking to people from the Department of Defense and whatnot, which was who was testifying, I believe number 3 person in the DOD.
You had a guy call the other day. You had a guy call the other day that said he woke up and he was in fear, and I know fear is not an option, but I think people are afraid, and the good people are afraid, and it's the whole Republican Congress doing what they did the other day. It's just an onslaught of unjust lies, and I don't know what next to do.
Yeah. Well, what next to do is to get good information, share it with your friends, and be sure that you're registered to vote, because that's ultimately what we're going to be able to do. And if there are good organizations out there that you'd like to affiliate yourself with, whether it's Drinking Liberally or whether it's the Democratic Party or whether it's Move to Amend, whatever it may be, there are almost environmental organizations for whatever your passion may be. There are groups out there, and participating, doing something, getting active is a great way to overcome, feelings of impotence, essentially, of lack of control, of lack, what can I do? Well, you can actually do a lot. Denise, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Ari, is it Ari or Ari in Chicago?
Ari?
Ari, yeah, you're on the air. What's up?
Hi, I called in before, and I just wanted to let everybody know that Saturday, March 26th, we're having a UBI march, a Universal Basic Income March.
Okay.
And this will be 12 noon Grant Park in Chicago to Federal Plaza, come rain or shine. It's grown over 25-plus cities, and it's global. We're excited to have former Alderman Amaya Pawar to talk about UBI, and this can definitely supplement and improve social safety nets. Sure. There is a lot of information about UBI and misinformation as well. So for people to research, that would be the best thing to take a look at it, because it is taking away the stigma of poverty, and it's a movement we could all lead to policy change, because so many folks are struggling from those in poverty to now middle class, and I think it's time for a change. And a few other community members with myself will share our stories.
Okay, so when and where again is this, Amy? Ari?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's from Grant Park to Federal Plaza, 12 noon, and this is going to be happening globally and all over the nation.
On what date?
Saturday, March 26th.
So next spring?
Tomorrow.
Oh, this is October.
I'm sorry, March. I mean, the march is on the 26th.
Oh, the march is on the. Okay, I got it. Okay, great. Thank you, Ari. Good luck with that. Good luck. It's fascinating stuff. Claire in Fort Worth. Hey, Claire, what's up?
Hi. Hold on one second. There, I'm off speaker now.
What's up?
Can you hear me?
I do.
Okay. We've talked before about voter security and elections down here in Tarrant County, and we're a real red county historically. The elections people have put in a fantastic system here. I've been helping people learn it, and it is so secure and so fantastic. Everybody gets a paper ballot. And our intake security is wonderful, because nothing is online to anything except the registration logs go back to our central registration log to verify that whatever we need to do. We've done away with a ton of paperwork. We've made life really easier for our voters. They get a touch screen to vote on, then they get a paper ballot.
So the touch screen is basically driving a printer? Is that the deal?
Yes, there's a little printer in the touch screen. You get a blank piece of paper. You get an access code to get into it.
But the vote is not being tabulated by the touch screen. The vote is being tabulated by the piece of paper? Or is the paper just a receipt?
It's the piece of paper goes into the scanner.
Okay, so the paper's the actual ballot. So basically, it's a printing device for ballots. That's great.
Yes.
That's great.
Then we put it in the scanner, and they have like 4 opportunities to look at it before they drop it in that scanner.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's great.
It's amazing, and I highly recommend that other places look into this.
Okay, Claire, thanks a lot for your
every
advocacy.
problem.
Yep, thank you for the call. Kate in Lamont, Illinois, listening to WCPT. Hey, Kate, what's up?
Oh, yes. I just wanted to ask you why these private insurance companies are allowed to call themselves Medicare. We're on Medicare, and we're being bombarded with things that say, call today to receive your free Medicare enrollment guide. Discover a different kind of Medicare. I'm reading it off of one of the brochures right now.
Right.
But this Ascension Complete, which is a private insurance company.
That's correct. That's correct. They can use that word because in 2005, when Medicare Part C, also known as Medicare Advantage, was invented by the Republicans in the Bush administration, its purpose was to, over the long term, privatize Medicare. And,
yes, I'm sure.
and so they kind of knitted it right into Medicare itself, just like, Betsy DeVos is working to privatize our schools, and so they bring charter schools and they kind of knit them into the public schools, system and network. It's the same scam. It's the exact same thing. And, and they can use these words and this terminology because it's written into the law. This is, there's no bugs here. This is all featured. This is exactly how it was intended. And they've, in what, it's been 14 years, I guess, since Medicare Advantage was made legal. And in that period of time, they've been able to capture about a quarter of all people who are on Medicare. So, it's insanely profitable for these companies, and B, it's taking a bite out of Medicare. Kate, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And in my humble opinion, one of the reasons they want to break Medicare is so that if we ever get Medicare for all, it'll be pre-broken. And welcome back. Carrie in New Windsor, New York. Hey, Carrie, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
Hey, thank you for taking my call, Tom.
Sure.
Hi. So October, which is almost over, has been National Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
Okay.
And I have a hotline for people that I would like to say twice, once before and after, if you would allow me to just
certainly go for it.
Awareness. Say again?
I said go for it. The domestic violence hotline number is?
Yes, thank you, sir. 1-800-799-7233.
Okay, and we'll give that again when you're done.
Thank you.
Or was that the essence of what you wanted to say, or was there something to add to it?
Yeah, I'd love to just, speaking of awareness, I have an easy way that people can daily tune into how systemic the repression of women is. If you just go on the radio any day, any time, and notice how many songs there are about, oh, I got to get that woman, oh, I love that woman. And then how many songs do you hear about, throughout history of like, oh, how I love my slave. He does so many things that I don't have to do, so I don't have to do them. And, so the point is, unlike slavery and the repression of people of color, the repression of women seems to be totally acceptable and everywhere, to the point that just last night, Harvey Weinstein, who, in case people don't know, is a famous person who was outed as being a serial rapist, and he's been in court and in the news. He just last night was almost completely welcome sitting in the audience at a comedy show until a couple of women stood up and spoke up. And instead of him being kicked out, they were kicked out.
Right.
Nobody.
And one of them was a comedian. One of them was one of the people on the program.
Yeah.
And
on the stage, I think, at the time.
Yeah.
So if once we hang up, I'm going to just say thank you. I'm going to say the domestic violence awareness hotline. The domestic violence hotline one more time. And then if you want to, this isn't totally related, but if you want to tell people about the bystander effect once I hang up, I'd really appreciate that if you would share that with people.
Maybe you should do that right now, Carrie.
Oh, well, I don't like to talk so
I'm assuming by bystander effect you're talking about, if somebody doesn't speak up. Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. So
Okay, it's a thing that psychologists they started seeing like a common pattern, and so they did research on it, and they kind of called it the bystander effect. And it started when a woman, I think in the city, was assaulted on the street, and people in
this goes back to the Kitty Genovese case in New York in the 60s. Yeah.
See, there you go. They knew, everybody that was watching it from their window thought somebody else was going to do something or call the cops, and nobody did. And so these guys researched it and found that the more people that are witnesses, the less likely people are to do anything about it.
Okay. So, Carrie, we're just about out of time. We got 15 seconds before we hit the break. What was the number again?
The domestic violence hotline is 1-800-799-7233.
Right, and if you find yourself in one of these situations or somebody that you know and love, do something. Make a phone call. Carrie, thank you. Thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Coming up on that, we'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Anything Goes Friday. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. And, thanks so much for supporting our program. We really do appreciate it. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Terrence in New Haven, Connecticut. Hey, Terrence, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, good day, Tom. How are you, sir?
I am well. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM.
Okay. I'm going to speak about our state here in Connecticut. People worried about the health plans you're talking about, the cost. You know what Skull and Bones Yale is doing? They own hospitals. They're buying up all the doctors' practices.
Really?
And yes,
is
they
this
are.
Is this Yale as part of their university function, or is this their endowment fund is investing in them?
They have a hospital. They have Smilo Cancer Hospital. They have a regular hospital.
Oh, this is part of their medical school, isn't it?
Right.
Okay.
What they're doing is they're buying up all the doctors' practices. I lost 3 doctors, and one of my doctors I got tight with, he's in a sweatshop over there.
Wow.
They put him in a computer, and it's like a kiosk. You go in there. Check this out. You can't see a urologist for 3 months. You can't see a neurologist for 4 months. There's no more private doctors.
Yeah.
And let me tell you another thing what they did, too. If they leave, say they leave, don't go back to a practice, they can't practice within 20 miles of a Yale facility because they have walk-in Yale. Some doctors went to the Bronx, New York. They couldn't because Greenwich is less than 20 miles from the Bronx.
Huh. That's amazing. I can't say that everything you're saying is accurate, Terrence. I have no idea, but I'm willing to believe you.
Check into it.
I will. And this is just another aspect of monopoly that has swept America since the Bork Doctrine was adopted by the Reagan administration and by the Supreme Court back in the 1980s, and we stopped enforcing monopolies. So, Terrence, thanks a lot for the call. Let's see here. Oh, Alan in San Francisco. Hey, Alan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to, you had a gal call a short time ago who was concerned about getting her Facebook page back.
Yeah, Carol. And me, too. Facebook disabled my account last week.
It's actually really easy. I work in comic books as a professional writer and artist, and so I usually use my account for fans so they can come and see artwork and stuff like that. And I was occasionally using it for politics, and I got banned earlier this year about 4 times in a row, one time for a solid month. And then I realized that you can have as many Facebook accounts as you like. You can have as many as you have emails, basically. And emails are free. You can get them through Yahoo or Gmail.
Right, but their
or
terms of
whatever.
service say you may only have one account, and they're now asking you to upload your driver's license. So or at least they asked me to, and they asked Carol to. So they're doing due diligence that goes beyond an email account.
Wow, no, that's strange. That's new to me because I have about 3 accounts. One I use for politics, and one I use for.
Then you may well be next, Alan.
Maybe I'm grandfathered in.
Except that Carol doesn't have an extra account, and the only extra account that I have is the one for this show, which has been around as long as my personal account has. But it's, I don't even administer it. It's administered by our webmaster, who's his name is Nigel Peacock. I mean, a different guy in a different place.
I see him in the YouTube chat room. When did you lose your account?
A week ago.
Okay,
maybe 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, it went away, and then for like 5 or 6 days, every day I uploaded my driver's license, and then 2 or 3 days ago, I finally got the message that your account has been permanently disabled. Good luck, Charlie. If you want to download your data, click here. You click there, and it just goes into space. If you want to contest this, click here, and then you're just back to the same loop of please upload your driver's license again, which I've already done 6 or 7 times.
Is it illegal to use somebody's driver's license?
I have no idea.
I would think it is the same way it's supposedly illegal to use somebody's Social Security.
No, it's no. They can any private company can ask for your driver's license for identification. My bank does every time I go in. So,
well, give it a shot with a different email and see what happens.
Yeah, well, I'll have to create one, but I'd rather than trying to slip around their terms of service, I'd rather just figure out what's going on. It's like get it fixed.
So the last time I got banned for posting a video from Animal House that said being fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life. I posted that on a conservative's Facebook page, and I got banned for a month for that. I didn't even say anything. I just posted the video that is free on YouTube.
Amazing. No, to the best of my knowledge, I wasn't banned. I was just kicked off. I mean, it wasn't like, hey, we've well, actually, maybe there may be different language for different things. Anyhow, Alan, thanks for the call. Okay. I'll keep you up to date. Kathy in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Kathy, you are watching us on Facebook, ironically enough.
Hey, Tom. Actually, I was originally watching on YouTube, and Facebook tends to be flaky. I'm a citizen journalist on the ground here with over 4,000 followers, and the degree of hacking and interference has been there for some time because we have these just 2 huge Trumpian fronts here, which are this LNG frac gas refinery and the Northwest Detention Center with 1,575 people in there on a toxic waste dump on Puyallup land, blah, blah,
Right.
So it's, we have these really intense things going on. We have a near media shutdown. Mainstream media just doesn't report it.
Mm-hmm.
There's pretty much not anything that our city council won't give Geo Group or Puget Sound Energy or U.S. Oil or any of those that are just taking over our port.
Are they making huge campaign contributions to the city council? Is that the deal?
Absolutely. 8 of 9 of our sitting council people have taken money from Geo Group.
Amazing.
Everybody except Chris Beal. Yeah. Amazing. So it's tough on the ground, and it feels like it's not getting through. And Facebook is getting intense. They just blocked a photo of a Kurdish child with white phosphorus burns.
Oh my. Oh my. Kathy, I'm out of time here, but thanks for sharing your story with us and your thoughts. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stop Being Reasonable, How We Really Change Our Minds by Eleanor Gordon Smith. This is from the introduction. Somewhere in the technological belt of California, where the only thing more precisely engineered than the software is the people, or maybe the people's teeth, lives an organization called the Center for Applied Rationality. For the low price of $3,900, the center will sell you a 4-day workshop on reasoning, during which participants eat, sleep, and take part in 9 hours of back-to-back activities together daily under one, presumably rationally designed roof. This year, like every other year, the center will receive hundreds of applications from people who want to attend because, as they put it, everyone I know is irrational and I want to fix them. These folks make for an easy punchline, a good group to laugh at, but it turns out many of us make a version of the same mistake when we think about persuasion. We think we know what it is to change our minds rationally, and the only question is why other people don't do it more often. The ideal mind change is calm. It reacts to reasoned argument. It responds to facts, not to our sense of self or the people around us. It resists the siren song of emotion. People like to talk about the public sphere, if there is such a thing, then its convex edge reflects this idealized image back at us. Think of the number of programs dedicated to the mind-changing magic of two sides saying opposite things. Meet the Press, State of the Union, Face the Nation. The branding of these things often bakes in a little reward. How brave I am for attending the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. How clever for my subscription to the Intelligence Squared debates. The proper way to reason, at least according to our present ideal, is to discard ego and emotion and step into a kind of disinfected argumentative operating theater where the sealed air conditioning vents stop any everyday fluff from floating down and infecting the sterilized truth. Years ago, I used to share this view. I'll tell you why, even though it will rightly want to make you take my lunch money. When I was in school, I was a champion debater, which was another way of saying I spent my weekends wearing a blazer and telling people in precisely timed intervals exactly how wrong they were. My teammates and I constructed arguments for 20 hours a week, putting premises in the crosshairs with the unblinking accuracy of people whose whole egos were on the line. We weren't bad either. Eventually, we made it to the World Championships in Qatar, where we wore blazers embroidered with the Australian coat of arms in gold and competed in what looked, in hindsight, like a scene in an apocalypse movie just before the purge begins. All of us in matching uniforms on fleets of white buses being shepherded through the desert haze to auditoriums where we would sit locked up together for an hour, surrounded by stopwatch-wielding officials. Debating left me with an attitude toward persuasion that was as precise as Euclidean geometry. Find the foundation, show why it's wrong. Buttress analysis with evidence. Emotion is for decorative flourishes only. Do not expect it to be load-bearing. Of course, I knew you could change minds by appealing to things like emotion or your opponent's sense of self, but doing that seemed kind of base. It felt nobly sportsmanlike to arm yourself with argument alone. It was the intellectual equivalent of turning up at dawn for your duel with your pistols shined and paces counted. It was how you were meant to fight. This perspective began to change after I produced a piece for the radio show This American Life in 2016. The idea had seemed simple. Turn around to my own catcallers, men who had wolf-whistled or made sexual comments to me on the street, and try to reason them out of doing it again. I spent hours giving these men all the evidence, all the reasoning, all the fancy footwork with premises. But after dozens of conversations, I walked away defeated. Over and over again, they walked away from our conversations as sure as they'd ever been that it was okay to grab, yell at, or follow women on the street. These men didn't seem fundamentally irrational or unstuck from reality. In fact, in a funny sort of way, I quite liked a few of them. One told me he modeled his courtship rituals on the animal kingdom. I'm just another paradise bird flaunting my stuff, he said triumphantly, as though this explained everything that needed to be explained. That's a good line. He made me laugh, but I couldn't change their minds. The experience deflated me, not just as a person and as a woman, but as someone who has always been optimistic about our ability to talk each other into better beliefs. We finished recording in November 2016, right after the U.S. general election, which set up a grim backdrop for a newly found pessimism toward rational debate and persuasion. But when the piece aired, a strange thing happened. I was inundated with interview requests. Could I write a 10-step guide to changing minds? Would I accept an award for the successful use of rational persuasion in public? What advice did I have for talking people out of being workplace harassers? I was astonished. Large numbers of people had apparently listened to my conversations with catcallers on the radio, conversations that I had walked away from feeling dejected and defeated, and heard instead instances of persuasive success. I think the explanation is that these conversations bore a sort of Madame Tussauds-like resemblance to what we think good mind changes look like. I said one thing, my catcaller said the opposite thing, and each of us tried to explain why we were right. I had stayed calm. They had been prepared to hear me out. I had used statistics. It looked for all the world like a rational debate, and the fact that I had failed to change any minds with this approach disappeared under the shadow of the unquestioned assumption that I deserved congratulations for even trying. I started to smell a rat. The book Stop Being Reasonable by Eleanor Gordon Smith. Our selection today for the Thom Hartmann Book Club is This Land, How Cowboys, Capitalism, and Corruption Are Ruining the American West by Christopher Ketchum. This is from Chapter 1. It's about halfway through the chapter. He's talking about Bernard DeVoto. DeVoto was the first major historian of the West who was also an environmentalist and an activist, the first chronicler of what Wallace Stenger called the West's curious desire to rape itself. DeVoto was a Westerner raised in Utah. He suffered in the provincialism and intolerance of Mormon country, went east to study, and then teach at Harvard, settled in Cambridge, but never forgot the beauty of his native ground. Loving the land and history, said a magazine profile, but loathing the society. His histories, novels, criticism, his essays in Harper's Magazine were for 20 years, where for 20 years he wrote the oldest column in American journalism, Easy Chair, pointed always west. His trilogy, published in the 1940s, The Year of Decision, Across the Wide Missouri, and The Course of Empire, garnered the Pulitzer, the Bancroft, and the National Book Award. Widely celebrated, DeVoto used his position to become his generation's most outspoken defender of the public lands. He called the West a plundered province, a resource colony for City, Nevada. Hey, Kevin, what's on your mind today?
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for taking my call. I wanted to talk to you. I'm looking at the Democratic, I guess, panel right now for president, and I don't really see anybody that I find logical. The only person I really like is Andrew Yang, and I think that I want to see how we can make him a little more mainstream and how we can get him out there to see, like, get his ideas out there, because he's the only one that I think, like, makes sense on that whole side. What do you think about him?
I don't, Andrew Yang's been a guest on this program once. I've never done a real deep dive into his policies. I think that, he's been pretty much a UBI, Universal Basic Income candidate. He's been talking about that, and that's what he's known for. I am ambivalent about UBI. I think broadly it's a good idea, but I know that there are also libertarians out there who are promoting UBI with the idea that it could be used as an excuse to basically do away with all other forms of what you might call welfare or social safety net or whatever. And then of course, once you've got everything consolidated into one UBI, then you start cutting that step by step, and you've done away with 50 years or 80 years of progressive structure building. But and in fact, I've been thinking it would be good to have Andrew Yang on and have a conversation specifically about that. But in terms of publicizing him or any other Democratic candidate, the thing to do is to go to his website. Share it with your friends, share it, through social media, send him a few bucks, this is how you promote any Democratic candidate. So that step by step, that's how I would do it. Thanks a lot for the call. Debbie in Studio City, California. Hey, Debbie, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm a little nervous, so bear with me.
It's okay.
My father was a doctor, and my mom worked his front office, and she did the medical insurance billing. And I grew up in the 60s, and it seemed like everybody could afford to go to the doctor back then.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the 1970s, things started getting, a little bit tougher. And I now, as an adult, I was reading and trying to figure out where everything started to go wrong. And in my opinion, and I may be wrong, Nixon signed in December of '74 a bill called the Health Maintenance Organizations Act of 1974.
Correct.
And from what I understand, that allowed the medical industry to become for-profit. And I was thinking that if they repealed this act, that might take some of the wind out of the sails of the insurance industries. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I don't know
about it.
that much about it, Debbie, but I do recall. I mean, in the early '70s, Louise and I had 2 different businesses in Michigan, and we had Blue Cross Blue Shield providing health insurance to our employees with both those companies. And my recollection is that I was paying $30 per month per person, but that was a fair amount of money back then. But I do remember that all 3 hospitals in Lansing, Sparrow, St. Lawrence, and Ingham Medical, were all nonprofit. Ingham Medical was run by the county. It was Ingham County. Sparrow was run by the it was some sort of a religious organization or nonprofit. And St. Lawrence was a Catholic hospital. And all 3 of those hospitals are now for-profit, to the best of my knowledge. Ingham Medical, maybe not. I don't live in Lansing anymore, but number one. And number 2, Blue Cross Blue Shield was a nonprofit back then, at least in Michigan.
Right.
And I always assumed that Michigan changed its laws, allowing hospitals and insurance companies to make that shift from nonprofit to for-profit. You're telling me that it was Nixon in '74. It may well be. I don't know. And so let's collectively just toss that out, Debbie. And if anybody does know, tweet it to me or, get it to me somehow, and I'll do, or call into the program, or, send us a link or whatever, and I'll track it down, because I would love to know too.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Debbie.
Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Great to hear from you. Jeff in Portland, Oregon, listening on X-Ray FM. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Hey, happy Friday, Tom. What a week, huh?
Yeah.
Thanks for taking my call. And it's not the reason I called today, but I want to let you know I was in Canada. I happened to be in Canada last week, leading up to their election day this Monday, and there was absolutely zero campaigning against privatizing their healthcare system, about privatizing their healthcare system.
Right.
And as you know, they have multiple parties, so you would think if there was any kind of dissatisfaction with their healthcare system, at least one of those parties would have seized on that. But true to what you've always said, in countries with national healthcare, not even the right-wingers run against it.
It's true.
So I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah.
And
it's
people
true.
can
And in fact, some people probably have been listening to the program long enough to remember that, back, I don't know, 5, 6, 8 years ago, something like that, we did our show from Copenhagen, from Denmark. Danish radio gave us a studio, and I love to debate conservatives, and so I had literally the most conservative people in the Danish parliament on my program. Had the editor of the magazine that published the Muslim cartoons that produced all that, which was, he used to the right of Rupert Murdoch, and had all these people on, and I'd say, you're a conservative. Yeah, I'm a conservative. I'm hardcore right wing. And I'm like, great, then you must want to do away with your national healthcare program here in Denmark. And they're going, what, are you crazy? And I would say, you want to privatize your schools or start charging people for college? No, are you nuts? And then I'd say, well, why are you a conservative? I don't want any more immigrants in the country. That's typically what it boiled down to.
Yeah, and I think there was this really small party. I don't even know the name of them, but they actually didn't win any seats at all across the country. But they're an extremist, anti-immigrant party up there, and I don't know for sure, but I bet you they were running against the healthcare system. To back your point, yeah.
That's fascinating.
So, yeah. So the issue, though, I wanted to zoom in on today is impeachment, and I really liked the piece on Common Dreams from Wednesday written by Jeffrey Isaac. It's titled, Is It Really Smart to Narrow the Impeachment to Ukraine? And, Mr. Isaac made several good points, 2 of which are, number one, the real audience, quote, the real audience of this impeachment is the American people, unquote. And to that, I would add, Tom, that the Democratic leadership should be have ongoing public education efforts. It should be like a heavyweight fight. You just don't go wait and go for the knockout without leading up to it with a lot of body
and on top of that, every time one of these narratives about Trump committing a crime starts to take hold, Trump comes up with some new and more outrageous stunt. Rush Limbaugh on his show on Wednesday opened the show crowing about what a political genius that Trump is, because once there was some damaging testimony in the House, about Trump and all this stuff, that Trump throws the word lynching out, and the media goes chasing off after it like a dog chasing a car with tin cans on strings hanging behind it. And frankly, it pains me to say it, but Rush Limbaugh was absolutely right. And literally every day, Trump has come up with something that, this thing that he did with Matt Gaetz, of storming the House of Representatives. This was something that Trump worked out with these guys the day before at a meeting at the White House. It's like, how do we grab the news cycle every day? That's what he learned as a reality TV star, and he is applying it really well. And the result of that is that none of these narratives hang around long enough to really embed themselves in the consciousness of the American people. And then the counter narrative is, which is that, the Democrats sabotaged themselves and they hacked their own computer, and, it was internal sabotage of the Democratic Party, and Russia had nothing to do with it, and, oligarch billionaires had nothing to do with it, and quack, 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 is actually starting to take hold, and Trump is promoting that. And this, it's like we're stepping through the looking glass. It's just totally, totally bizarre. Anyhow, I agree, Jeff. I think that the impeachment should be broad. I think it should be comprehensive. I think they should list all of the crimes that we know of that he has committed, and all of the ones that they feel that they have a strong enough evidence that in a trial in the Senate they can prove them, and that we should go forward from there. It's 15 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. Thom Hartmann here with you. And welcome back. Annie in Tucson, Arizona. Or is that Phoenix? Which one is it?
It's Tucson, Tom.
Okay.
Hi, how's your day? Thank you for taking my call.
My day is great, Annie, and you're welcome. What's on your mind today?
Well, I'm a disabled veteran. I actually got out of the military on a medical disability, and I heard a caller a few back talk about how great the VA was when she was a service member's dependent. And I just wanted to talk to you about that, because in the last 15 years, I've been a part of 2 or 3 national scandals. I've been given Form 95s to sue the VA, actually, in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And it was great maybe at one time, but it has not been since I've been a disabled veteran. The only person I hear talking about that's kind of like Bernie. He's talking about the medical marijuana issue with veterans and how that's not federally legal.
Yeah, Bernie used to be the chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. Or the minority leader, I guess he was. And right. he I mean, we did veterans panels on this show where Bernie would come on and say, I only want to hear from veterans. We did that a couple of times. And I mean, he was very, very serious about these issues.
Isn't he? And he's the only candidate. Like with Elizabeth Warren, I saw an interview with her, I guess it was about a year back, where she said, oh, if we do Medicare for all in the way that I want to do it, we won't have to worry about veterans because they have the VA. But that's an unfunded, understaffed place that likes to over-medicate people and treat them like a protocol instead of a human. And especially as a woman veteran, I've had surgery sites abscess because I did not get follow-up care following a surgery to remove cancer from my body for a year and a half. I've had complications for 10 years. So maybe the VA was great at one point, Tom, but I think...
What would you do to fix it, Annie?
The broader point. I would fund it.
Okay, so it's a matter of funding.
systematically, they're always understaffed. There's never enough healthcare workers or mental health care workers. And do you remember the Phoenix scandal in 2009 where patients were being placed on a waiting? That was when my surgery happened, and my stomach abscessed. I ended up going to the hospital twice for an emergency sort of treatment. And I ended up with bills from that because they said I should have waited in line at the VA and waited to die.
So you went to a private facility instead of the VA because you couldn't get in. Yeah, I remember when that happened, and that was when Bernie was doing Brunch with Bernie on this show, and was taking this on. And my recollection is that there were a number of so-called fiscal conservatives in Congress, mostly Republicans, who were not enthusiastic about increasing funding for the VA because they felt that it was government-funded medical services, and really people should just buy insurance or something. Rationalizations like that.
People-funded government playthings? Aren't wars people-funded government atrocities at this point? We know we've been lied in several wars, so if they don't want to take care of the veterans, maybe we should stop meddling in everybody else's backyard.
Well, maybe we should do both. We should stop meddling in everybody's backyard, and we should take care of our veterans. I think we can walk and chew gum.
Instead of being upset about the consequences that we've created.
Yeah,
yes,
there
sir.
you go. Okay, Annie, thank you for your call, and thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm sorry to hear that things have not gone so well for you. Clearly, no system is perfect. It's 20 minutes past, and we've got a bunch of imperfect systems here in this country. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Real damage this is doing to the United States of America. It's all over that video over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Glenn in New York City. Hey, Glenn, what's up?
Hi. If Bernie wins the nomination, it seems to me the Republicans are going to really make hay and do a lot of commercials about his heart attack.
I think no matter who wins the nomination, the Republicans are going to, do a lot of commercials and make a lot of hay. If it's one of the women, they're going to be going after women. If it's Bernie, they'll be going after his heart attack and calling him a socialist. If it's Joe Biden, they'll be talking about his son or about how old he is and he forgets things. I mean, whatever it's going to be, they're going to do it. And they're going to do it in as crass and underhanded a way as they possibly can. That's what Republicans do, Glenn.
Yeah, I know.
So I don't think that we should be voting for or against any particular candidate. Or if it was Pete Buttigieg, oh my God, he's gay, or Andrew Yang, they'd figure out how to some way to slip in some sleazy, anti-Asian racism. They will do this. We should not be voting or not voting for someone simply because of what the Republicans are going to say. We need to pick the best candidate and put all our bets on the table.
Yeah, it seems to me that a lot of us fence sitters between Warren and Bernie, who consider them equal, that now are going to kind of slide to Warren.
Well, I think some of that is happening. You've got some people who supported Hillary before and they didn't like Bernie taking her on, and they may be more inclined to be progressive, and so they would support Elizabeth Warren. You've got a lot of women who or a lot of people, men and women, who think that, having a woman president, finally, hey, it's time. On the other hand, Bernie has been, paying his dues since he was 17 years old and has been absolutely consistent all these years. And his fundraising numbers are great, and he's pulling in great endorsements and huge crowds. We're just going to have to see how it plays out. And I'm not going to be putting my thumb on any scale beyond suggesting. I'm not endorsing anyone in particular, but I do think that we have two great, solid progressives in Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And if either one of them becomes the nominee, I'll be tickled pink, or whatever the phrase is. On the other hand, if it's anybody else, I will still do everything I can to get them elected, because having Donald Trump in the White House for 4 more years, I believe, will be the end of our republic. Glenn, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Howard in Muncie, Indiana. Hey, Howard. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up? Howard? No Howard. Let's try Steve in Atlanta, Georgia. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, there's 3 major issues for me in the election: climate change, healthcare, and the cost of college. Okay. And specifically with this last point, I don't understand why so many people are content with the cost of college these days. I just don't hear enough outrage about it. I graduated in the mid-'90s, bartended my way through school, graduated no debt. Nowadays, they can do the same, but they're graduating tens of thousands of dollars in debt.
You're right.
And I don't understand why the cost of college is so high. And I just,
there's a real simple little bit of math that explains an awful lot of it. When Ronald Reagan came into office in 1980, roughly 80% of the cost of college was paid for by state, federal, and local governments and programs and college endowments, and 20% was paid for with tuition. Today, tuition pays for about 80% of the cost of college, and state, federal, local, and endowment support covers only about 20% of the cost of college. So there have been some costs that have gone up, mostly the salaries of the university presidents, but that's really, just another thing that gets buried in a budget. The main thing has been that over the years, you've had 4 consecutive Republican administrations that have done everything they can to cut funding to higher education, and their cuts have been very successful and very effective, to the point that college is now 4 times, 5 times more expensive than it used to be, because that support has gone. And the 80% support, by the way, was on the back end of the GI Bill, which was 100% support. And out of that, we learned that if we educate, our young people at no cost, that produces an explosion of innovation and new products and new companies, as we saw in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, as a consequence of people getting a good education on the GI Bill. And those people, and it paid for itself between 7 and 10 times return on investment. For every dollar we spent to send somebody to go to college, we got between $7 and $10 in additional tax revenue we wouldn't have gotten, because as a college educated, as a college graduate, they're earning more money than they would have earned otherwise. And this is, of course, over their lifetimes. But we're the only developed country in the world that doesn't make college either super affordable or free to our young people. We're literally the only one. We're the only developed country in the world that has, where you can go bankrupt by getting sick, and we're the only country in the world where you can be in debt for the first 30 years of your working life because you had the temerity to go to college. Steve, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Speaking the truth, the multinational corporations would really rather you didn't hear. Thom Hartmann. In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, we're reading from United States of Distraction, Media Manipulation in Post-Truth America and What We Can Do About It, by Nolan Higdon and Mickey Huff. And this is from the foreword by Ralph Nader. Ever since the few began to control the many, disinformation, fabrications, and distractions have been used to shape consent, impose submission, and maintain domination. Whether by the invoked authority of God, the divine right of kings, the dictatorial embodiment of a fatherland, the dictatorship of the proletariat, or the tyranny of commercially managed marketplaces, the casualty of such control has always been the ability of ordinary people to give voice to their own realities, needs, demands, and grievances. Given the inherent pragmatism of the human mind, the oppressed have often found it safer to believe rather than to think, to obey rather than dissent. Today, such a path is reinforced by a plutocratic political economy that allows corporations to dominate mass media, education, and the production of knowledge and memory. Human history, however, has not been without its visionaries, seers, and prescient intellectuals, poets, artists, thinkers, and philosopher rebels. Every major religion admonishes its adherents not to allow the merchant class, with its singular focus on aggregating profits at the expense of truth, compassion, and self-restraint, to amass too much power. Such instructions have emanated not from revelation, but from ethics learned via the daily experience of living in community with others committed to the common good. Unfortunately, it has not been the transactional incentives of commerce, but the cooperative bonds of community that dominate the most significant acts of life in the United States today. The dystopian scenarios portrayed in George Orwell's 1984 and Aldous Huxley's Brave New World look like understatements compared to today's plutocratic deployment of communications technologies, many of them developed by taxpayer-funded government programs and grants. The ultimate success of top-down censorship is self-censorship by the people. The same holds true for mass surveillance. From radio and television to the internet and smartphones, and all the video platforms and apps in between, commercially controlled media have used seduction and addiction to lure users to increasingly stare into screens and share personal data and location, thus becoming complicit with authoritarianism and mass surveillance. In the process, the population has become fact-deprived and over-entertained, with lowered expectation levels and reduced attention spans. These technology-driven changes have distracted people from their rights and powers as citizens. As authors Nolan Higdon and Mickey Huff write, long before Trump's candidacy, ratings drove programming and news. In the process, celebrity, entertainment, scandal, crime, disaster, and spectacle clearly dominated over substantive reporting, and public interest advocacy capable of questioning and countering abuses of corporate power and government authority. Trump, they noted, came right out of the omnipresent corporate commercialism. Deadly degradation of media is everywhere. Fueled by Madison Avenue's promotional perfidy, the junk food industry, bypassing parental authority, has lied its way directly into the stomachs of tens of millions of children, creating an obesity epidemic with its attendant diseases. Alternative facts, anyone? 45 years ago, venerated CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite called the 3 minutes or so devoted to a serious news story merely a headline service. If anything, the situation has worsened since Cronkite's time. Gone are the fairness doctrine, the right of reply, and any pretense that the Federal Communications Commission is regulating the broadcasters according to the 1934 Communication Act standard of the public interest, convenience, and necessity. The takeover of hundreds of newspapers, local television stations, and radio stations by corporate profiteers is still worsening. These corporations loot vulnerable media operations by cutting out reporters, investigative journalists, whistleblowers, educational content, and local coverage. Magazines are shrinking, going out of business, or just migrating to online-only versions. Social media cannot generate such content in addition to other shortcomings. Young people today are becoming increasingly illiterate. They spend more time staring at screens, but ultimately read less long-form content unless forced to do so for classwork. Fewer people are showing up for town meetings, marches, demonstrations, and rallies, in spite of the ease and immediacy of communication enabled by the internet. The so-called information age has become the disinformation age, with the corporate media's exclusion of the civic community being one of its most devastating triumphs. In the 1960s and 1970s, we could not have succeeded in advancing standards for public health and safety, labor, and environmental integrity without the help of mass media reporting on public campaigns and congressional hearings, or without large audiences tuning into programs such as The Phil Donahue Show, which dedicated airtime to discussing our investigations, reports, and exposés. Now it is not just corporate media, but the Congress itself that is increasingly shutting out citizens groups. The United States of Distraction by Higdon and Huff. Thom Hartmann Cruise will be sailing in July of 2020. The 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. President Obama spoke at Elijah Cummings' funeral just a few minutes ago. And some folks are suggesting that he kind of took a shot at Trump. Maybe. I think it's likely. He was talking about how, you know, he wanted the message that he wanted to share with his children, with his daughters, was that there's nothing weak about kindness and compassion. There's nothing weak about looking out for others. There's nothing weak about being honorable. You're not a sucker to have integrity and treat others with respect. You know, all of this, well, this is such a contrast with Trump. I mean, in fact, here's the clip. Just listen to this.
And I was thinking I'd want my daughters to know how much I love them, but I'd also want them to know that being a strong man includes being kind.
Being kind is
that there's
a
nothing
strength.
Weak about kindness and compassion. There's nothing weak about looking out for others. There's nothing weak about being honorable. You're not a sucker to have integrity and to treat others with respect.
And then he goes on to talk about how, you know, we use the title honorable for people who get elected to public office. He says, you know, this is the title we confer on all kinds of people who get elected to public office. We call them honorable. But Elijah Cummings was honorable before he was elected to office, and there is a difference. I thought that's just like, that's brilliant. So, anyhow, Kim in Port Huron, Michigan. Hey, Kim, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hello. I just need to pick your brain a little. I'm not that up on what's happening in the military, but this pertains to Syria and the Pentagon, and where this came from, I don't know. The Pentagon wanting to deploy armored defenses in the oil fields in Syria, but not wanting to protect the Syrians who are our allies.
You mean the Kurds?
I'm just heartsick.
Yeah.
Or the Kurds, yes, our allies. I'm wondering why they feel it's more important. Is this from the president?
Yes.
Or is the Pentagon like this?
No, you have. I mean, this is Republican foreign policy, oil above everything else, and you know, you could argue some Democrats have been in on that too. But Trump is, first of all, Trump has moved 14,000 U.S. troops into that region over the last, I believe, over the last year, since the beginning of this fiscal year. He keeps saying, we're getting out of the wars, we're getting out of the stupid wars. No, we're not. We're just turning the Kurds over to the Turks and the Russians. We're just, you know, betraying our allies.
And there's something that was said about the Kurds being herded in the direction of the oil fields. Why?
Well, because that's the direction. That's an area that's still controlled by the United States, by and large. I mean, you know.
So there is a good, if slightly not good.
There is a chunk of northeastern Syria that we still functionally control. And, as is, there's a chunk of northwestern Iraq, where they kind of all meet there, that is under Kurdish control and where we have some influence, and it's semi-autonomous.
Oh, good.
But the thing is that we're taking the troops that we're pulling out to make room for Turkey and Russia to bring their troops in. We're moving those U.S. troops into that part of Iraq where the Kurds are. And the Iraqi government is saying, we're okay with the Kurds being semi-autonomous, but we don't want Americans in here. And it's going to get messy because the Iraqi government is now largely controlled by Iran.
But part of this is being orchestrated by our military to get the Kurds away from the danger?
I think this is Trump. I think this is, I think our military is horrified by this. I think, in particular, our special forces guys, men and women who have fought side by side with the Kurds for 15, 20 years now, I think they're horrified by it. But, Erdogan called up Donald Trump and said, Donald, you will do this. You have a Trump Tower here in Turkey, and if you want to keep it, Erdogan threatened to take the name Trump off the Trump Tower back, 2 years ago, and Trump caved in. This is when he was putting Turkey on the list of Muslim countries for the travel ban. And Trump caved in and said, oh, no, don't take my name off Trump Tower. And I think that's exactly what happened here again. And now Erdogan and Putin are, putting together an alliance here. And it's going to get really tricky because, Erdogan and Turkey is part of NATO, and, and they've wanted to be part of the European Union. And yet their most recent large weapons purchase was surface-to-air missiles from Russia. And the U.S. military was saying, well, wait a minute, you can't do that because, then they're going to have access to American weaponry, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an absolute mess. And it's all, I think, because, Trump is just kowtowing to basically, whichever autocrat he talks to on the phone the most recently. Kim, I got to move along, but, thank you for the call. David in Torrance, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I'm an immigrant, and there are a lot of people in immigrant community that have a belief that that there actually a right-wing, a deep state exists, that they would never let a progressive to be elected as a president. This kind of thought is actually very deep among a lot of immigrants.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get your opinion on this.
I wouldn't describe it as a deep state. The deep state basically is the career bureaucrats who just do their job. And to that extent, you want to have a deep state. It's a stabilizer for everything. At the top, politics goes left and right. But down deeper, you've just got the people who, who collect the tax money and who pay the Social Security checks and keep the roads working and all that. That's your deep state. But there is a massive infrastructure that has been built up since the Powell Memo, since 1971, funded by right-wing billionaires and right-wing foundations. There's a media infrastructure, right-wing hate radio and Fox News. There is a judicial infrastructure, the Federalist Society. There's a legislative infrastructure, ALEC, and some of the other groups. And there's one for every state in the union, as well as this national umbrella group. There are think tank infrastructures that are designed to influence the media and influence legislators, like the Heritage Foundation and Cato. All of that stuff, you could call that a deep state if you want, but it's not. None of it is officially part of the state. These are all external actors who have, in my opinion, largely seized control of the American political system. And the question is, are Americans sufficiently dissatisfied with their complete loss of representation? This is the Page and Gillen study that was done out of Northwestern or out of Princeton back 3-4 years ago, that found that the probabilities of what the average working people want being translated into legislation was just random noise, whereas the probabilities of what wealthy people want being translated into legislation was measurable and trackable and identifiable. And that means that we're no longer a democracy. It means we're an oligarchy. And to the extent that the oligarchs are running the show, yeah. And so then the question is, are the American people sufficiently disgusted by this that they will vote for some really significant change, somebody like, Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or not. And I think they are. I think that that's what they voted for with Donald Trump. I think that's what although he didn't win a majority of the vote, but I think that's what they voted for with Barack Obama on hope and change. I think that's what they voted for with Bill Clinton with his whole, his New Covenant speech, which was a very, very progressive speech, even if he didn't govern all that progressively. So, and it's something that would, if we experience an economic crash, something that would be much easier to do, because then there's a general consensus that things aren't working. But we'll just have to wait and see, David, in the election. And I think all of us can do is really push these issues as much as we can. Thank you for the call, Jim in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Real quick, yes, Nixon did sign in that HMO law, and it was wholly designed to build profit back into the medical system, because prior to that, almost all hospitals were religious. They were nonprofits.
Or they were county-run, in the case of Ingham Medical and
or
Lansing.
county-run, yeah. And prior to the HMO law, we had something called the Hill-Burton Act, and you can look that up. And it was matching funds for anybody that wanted to build a new hospital from the government, from the federal government.
Interesting, but it had to be nonprofit. So was the requirement that hospitals and insurance companies pre-74, was that a federal requirement?
Pre-74, insurance companies were completely divorced from standard medical care. I mean, they were just insurance companies. This was designed to build profit into the system.
Right. Okay. The HMO Act. I've got to do some research. Jim, thank you for that. I appreciate the call. Thank you. Ron in Jessup, Georgia. Hey, Ron, what's up?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I just have a question about the fiasco when the Republicans attacked the meeting the other day and took their cell phones in. I know that's a security breach, and I'm just curious if there's any repercussion that these guys are going to have to face for, number one, breaking into the room when they weren't supposed to be in there, and number two, for the really bad part of it, which was using their cell phones, which I understand is a real no-no as far as the House goes.
It's a crime, too. Yeah, it's a crime.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
This is largely going to be up to Nancy Pelosi, and I don't know which way she's going to go on this. I mean, they could bring these guys before the House Ethics Committee. They could make criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. I'm extremely doubtful that Bill Barr will do anything about it. He's ignored most of the other criminal referrals. So we'll see. I don't know the answer to the question, Ron. I don't think anybody knows the answer to the question right now. We'll just have to wait and see. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Anything Goes Friday, taking your calls. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Bob in Bridgeport, Connecticut, listening on WBAI. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing today? Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
One thing real quickly, the gal that called in, the vet, the healthcare system in the United States. I thought that Congress has the golden healthcare package of all healthcare packages, 4 years, and they and their families are covered for life, no out of pocket, no out of network. And a simple executive order from any president whereby at the end of the year, Congress has to come up with a health care plan for the country at large, or they have no health care. Congress and the civilian population have the same exact health care.
Actually, right now, one of the things that was required by the Republicans to allow Obamacare out of committee was that every member of Congress has to be on Obamacare. They are literally the only group in the United States that is mandated by law to have Obamacare. But every member of the House and Senate right now has Obamacare as their health insurance.
Okay, so they did change that.
They did. And that came into effect with the Affordable Care Act in whatever year that was, 2011 or whatever the year was. And but But yeah, so in fact, Mark Pocan made that point on this program on Wednesday. And, but, you know, I would hope that, you know, they would, more of them would start supporting, you know, single-payer health care or something like that. Anyhow, thank you for the call, Bob. Steve in Topanga, California. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Not much. I just want to make a couple points. You know, we get what we vote for. Example, Trump.
Well, yes and no. You know, 3 million of us voted, more of us voted for Hillary than voted for Trump, number one.
I realize that.
And number two, you may think that you're voting for, I mean, fill in the blank, you know, policy that you like. The simple fact of the matter is, though, that generally speaking, what the majority of Americans want is not translated into policy and has not been since the mid-1980s.
Okay, so here's where I'm going with this, is the Democrats who vetted Bill Barr, you know, for his confirmation hearing, right. I mean, what were they thinking? They think Bill Barr wasn't the same guy that Bill Barr of old that got all the Reagan's Iran-Contra criminals out of jail? I mean,
good question.
If you do the same thing
Steve.
over and over, that's a sign of insanity.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid that the Democrats, the Democrats are taking a knife to a gunfight every time. They play too nice. I mean, they got to go Machiavellian on this whole thing. It's slipping away. I'm afraid it's a slipping away. Anyway, as far as health care, I had a valve job. I had the best care ever when I lived in Hawaii. Unbelievable. I went to Queens Medical Center, and it was like going to a hotel. I had my surgeon was all he did valve jobs, and you know, I took a long recovery, but whatever they do in Hawaii, I mean, it was after 2008 and my business crashed. I was pretty much out of it. Anyway, that's
Hawaii was one of the first states to have the state equivalent of something like Obamacare. Hawaii, I think at the time that Obamacare was passed, was the only state in the union that had no people who had no health insurance. Everybody in Hawaii is
pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
It's a very progressive state.
Because of them. So anyway, Tom, great show.
Thank you, Steve.
Let's get tough.
There you go. I agree. Thanks for the call. We'll be back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back in just a moment. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Power lines. Anything Goes Friday. Robert in Wakanda, Illinois. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you. If you don't have time to clarify this, please do so on Monday. I would like us to impeach Trump. However, how will it be different than impeaching Bill Clinton? Because Bill Clinton stayed in office the full 8 years and Al Gore never got in there. Pence, they're saying, would become president. But how would that happen if Bill Clinton wasn't impeached?
Well, an impeachment is just an indictment. It's the equivalent of being charged with a crime. The House of Representatives does not have the power to remove a president from office. They only have the power to say, this guy's a crook, and here's our list of the crimes that he created. That's called the bill of impeachment, or the whatever bill of I forget the exact name for it. And then that goes to the Senate, and in the Senate, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court comes over and plays the role of judge, and the Senate plays the role of jury, and the House is the prosecutor, and the executive branch is the defense, and the House puts on their prosecution, they lay out their charges, the executive branch, the president's people, put on their defense, they lay out their defense against those charges, and then the senators, like a jury, vote. And if 2/3 of them or more vote to remove the president from office, he leaves office. If they don't hit that 2/3 mark, and with Clinton, I'm not even sure they hit 50%. If they don't hit that 2/3 mark, then the president stays in office. He's been impeached, that is to say he's been indicted, he's been charged with a crime, but he hasn't been convicted. So the way that impeachment would benefit us with regard to Trump is at two levels. A, simply the impeachment, without removing from office, reveals to the world and certainly to Americans what a criminal he is. Assuming that that they make that case, they make it strongly. If he's removed from office, I personally am of the opinion that Donald Trump is actually dangerous to democracy and to world peace, that he's erratic. I mean, look at what he just did in Syria, and that he could trigger a war with North Korea. He could abandon South Korea. He could. Exactly. I mean, all the crazy things that this guy could do on a whim that could be so destructive, I worry about. And I frankly think, as much as I intensely dislike Mike Pence, somebody who I've actually met and debated in person, as much as I intensely dislike Mike Pence, I don't think he's crazy. And I think Trump actually is mentally ill. And so impeaching him, even if he's not removed from office, wakes America up to him. If he's removed from office, all the better. I can sleep better at night. That's my shtick, Robert. Thanks a lot for the call. Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, just a kind of a summary of what's going on this week. This whole DOJ investigation of the DOJ,
right.
It's insanity. They're not going to investigate anything. The only reason they're coming out with that diatribe is to shore up his voter base. That's all they're doing.
Oh, I realize this is in large part a PR strategy, but it's also a payback strategy. I mean, they're going to be going after Neil McCabe and Jim Comey and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and
absolutely.
all these people whose names are household names because you can't go 5 minutes on Fox News without hearing them. And it's going to cause, I mean, this is just devastating. It's got to be devastating the morale at the FBI, among other agencies.
The thing is, anybody that has any political initiative or knows what's going on in this country, I didn't need the Mueller report. I don't need any of this stuff to understand what a lunatic that man is.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
I absolutely do. Tim, I want to get one last call in here, but yeah, I agree. William in Portales, New Mexico. Do I have that right?
That's correct. Yeah. Thanks for taking my call, dude.
Sure.
And, I think for me, I've been listening to your show and was really galvanizing when you talked about, like, the Heritage Foundation. Because there isn't a deep state. And if there was, that would be it.
Well, there's not a pernicious deep state. I mean, you do have a permanent federal and state bureaucracy. I mean, but there's not like some giant conspiracy inside the government. I
don't think there is, because if there was,
but if you want a giant conspiracy, it's operating in plain sight. Federalist Society, the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute. I mean, they publicize what they're doing, and I think that's your point, William. Yeah, thanks a lot for the call, and thank you so much for being with us today and all this week. Please spread the word however you're hearing this program or watching this program. Make a commitment to yourself to tell some friends about it, because odds are wherever you're picking up this show, you're also picking up a lot of good progressive programming, and we need more progressive programming in this country. We need more progressive messages. So don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag You're It, and have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you on Monday right here.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.